To hear the continuation of evidence from Professor Hurst for CPPF and Cambourne Parish Council, followed by Mr Woodfield and then Mr Littlewood. Before we go on to evidence, there is just one thing I think that we need to mention this morning. Yesterday, Mr Underwood and myself received a note jointly from the applicant and Clare Hall concerning the Clare Hall objection, and I understand that Mr Cameron, you wish to speak to this first thing this morning.
Yes, sir. Just so that everybody knows, this is a joint request made on behalf of the applicant and Clare Hall that the hearing of their case be adjourned. Their case is due to begin next Thursday and then will continue after the break, and the request is that it shouldn't start next Thursday, but it should start after the break, and that will be on Tuesday the 4th of November 2025. That is the formal request. But perhaps of more importance is the reason for making the request. And in that note, you will see at paragraph 2.1, it states the applicant and Clare Hall have made substantial progress towards reaching agreement on matters which would address Clare Hall's objection. Detailed heads of terms are agreed, and legal agreements to formalise the heads of terms have been prepared and are currently being negotiated. If the legal agreements are completed, it will enable Clare Hall to withdraw its objection to the scheme in full, including its pending claim for an award of costs. So the reason that we're asking for, jointly asking for the listing in the programme for the beginning of Clare Hall's case to be put off, is that will give time for the formal legal agreement to be completed, and if it is completed, then Clare Hall will not need to appear. So it would, if that happens, and there is obviously an if on that, save a considerable amount of inquiry time, because Clare Hall's case is listed to last for between 6.5 and 7 sitting days, and therefore that request is made, and it's not made in some kind of hope that there will be agreement, because it's recorded that detailed heads of terms are agreed. It's a question of converting those heads of terms into a formal agreement. Yes. And so that's the request that's made, sir. I can't say anything more about those heads of terms for the reasons set out in the note, and it's a joint request, and I don't want to add anything to the request because that would not be fair on Clare Hall, because they're not here.
Thank you, Mr Cameron. We are minded to agree to that request, given the advanced state of discussions between those two parties. There's clearly one particular implication, which, as you said, there's a NIV in there, and if things don't go as you currently anticipate, and the agreement isn't concluded, it would leave the inquiry short by one sitting day, which we would have to accommodate. Clearly you anticipate that the risk of that is minimal, given what you've said, but clearly we have to bear that in mind. That would have to be accommodated some way. Looking ahead to what's to come, as things currently stand with the programme we've got, it's fairly tight, and I think it would be difficult to accommodate what we would lose next week within the currently scheduled sitting days.
So I appreciate that. What the statement does say on the prospects at 3.3 There's a double negative which turns into a positive. The parties consider it very unlikely that it will not be possible to complete the legal agreements by Monday the 3rd of November. So you have that information before you, and I think I can add that it seems to me that the idea next Thursday of going through the motions with Professor Short when everybody knows that agreement's been reached would not be a useful way of spending time. It would increase costs, certainly for Clare Hall, or could do, and it doesn't benefit anybody going through that process when agreement has been reached. But so I accept that if for some reason, unexpected reason, agreement is not reached, then we have a tight programme, but we will certainly on the applicant's part we would have to cut our cloth to try and assist on that, because we see considerable advantage in you acceding to this request.
Mr. Cambourne, you might not be able to answer this, and I'm conscious that Clare Hall aren't here. If we're in a situation where you don't reach agreement as anticipated, do you think there'd be a position where actually Clare Hall might have sort of withdrawn some, if not all, of their objections, or I'm just wondering whether there might be less or fewer issues to go through, or you might not even be in a position to comment on that.
It's difficult for me to comment on that because the nature of these agreements are nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. But this is not, we're hoping to reach agreement. Agreement has been reached. Detailed heads of terms are agreed. It's just a question of turning it into a legal document.
Yeah, no, it's just as Mr. Clegg says, you know, if best endeavours and all that hope doesn't happen, we've ended up with an issue with the programme, as you understand. So obviously you mentioned that you would cut your cloth accordingly. Obviously Clare Hall aren't here to do that, but I think we'd have to look very closely at the programme and timings if that did happen. But I take what you say about your confidence that this is going to.
And I'm not saying that Clare Hall would have to cut their cloth. They're not here. If they come back, they'll have to be allowed to make their objection. But given the note, which is a joint note signed by my instructing solicitors and by Denton's, you may think you can have a high degree of confidence in that.
Thank you, Mr. Cambourne. Well, I think we do, and as I said earlier, we're minded to agree, and that does seem the appropriate way forward as things stand. There are two other implications that I think we need to touch on. First, there's the documentation that Clare Hall has already put in, that's listed in the core documents library. Those proofs would clearly be withdrawn as representations.
That's my understanding, sir. That will be a term of the agreement.
Yes. There is then the matter of participation in relation to the inquiry time concerning the Clare Hall objection as it currently stands, because that was not just for witnesses on behalf of Clare Hall. There was also going to be attendance both in recall and in appearance for the first time by witnesses for the applicant. Now, Mr. Underwood and I have spoken about this, and we've got to bear in mind the statement of matters issued by the Secretaries of State. And there are certain matters which we need to report on, which we think we still need to hear from the applicant's witnesses on, which were in that block of time. If I can just run through the ones we've marked. it's not just for that. There may be questions that the programme officer is aware of that are by other parties as well. And I think this applies to Mr. Saunders, who was due to be recalled on the 4th of November. Certainly questions have been, we've got notice of questions by Mr. Burford and Mr. Saunders. On the 6th of November, Mr. Southland on flood risk has not appeared yet. Mr. Toby Lewis on noise and vibration. And although we've already heard Mr. Wilson, there are heritage matters which, although there's no longer a Clare Hall objection, relate to the Clare Hall area, which we need to report on. So I think our view is we would still need to hear from those witnesses. We wouldn't anticipate the time required being anything like as much was originally envisaged. And there would seem to be the opportunity, if things go as is currently anticipated, that attendance, subject to other commitments the people involved may have, could perhaps be accommodated at the beginning of week 7 of the inquiry programme, because clearly in this scenario we wouldn't be hearing from Mr. Blacklock or Ms. Lamb, and that time would fall away, and Mr. Wilson's already scheduled to appear within those 2 days. So, subject to no immediate adverse reaction to that suggestion, Mrs. Vincent will be looking to make arrangements.
So what we would plan to do is to recall the witnesses as stated, but I don't anticipate we would spend very long in evidence in chief, and we may just tender some of the witnesses so that they can answer questions put. And so you would anticipate, just thinking, not sitting in week 6, but sitting in week 7, or would you anticipate sitting in week 6 as well?
Well, no, I think if, subject to availability, as Mr. Clegg said, if we could accommodate your 4 witnesses on Tuesday the 11th, then I don't think we would need to sit in week 6. Those are our initial thoughts as to how the programme could work.
We thought that would minimise disruption. Later on in week 7, there are already people lined up to speak at certain times, and it would seem to make more sense to have everybody here for 1 week than 2 part weeks.
Yes, sir. My only concern about that is that there should be sufficient time, because the recall of the witnesses, say, happens on the Tuesday, and then on the Wednesday we go straight to Mr. Franklin, and then we have Mr. Sensible on the Thursday, and that should give us enough flexibility. But if for any reason, and I know that Mr. Parker is going to raise something about Mr. Littlewood's evidence, we needed more time to deal with something else, we have got, and we would be available in week 6. And what I would rather not do, but it's a matter for you, is to create problems of our own making by trying to bunch everything into week 7, and we've then got no flexibility. And it may be that, depending on how things work out this week and next week, we've now got Thursday that is available that we could use for something else. I'm not suggesting that we should, but if something were to run over, we could do that. And I would rather just keep in mind week 6, just in case there's anything else we have to do, rather than ending up creating a problem for ourselves. But I see entirely the logic of trying to do everything in sensible weeks and not
Yes.
come back on individual days.
Yes, I think it would be very generous to keep week 6 available in its entirety.
No, I'm not suggesting in its entirety, but just in case we needed
Yes.
it.
I think we don't need to take a final view on that now, but that would be our preference too.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Parker, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, sir. I note it simply because I want to raise it at the earliest possible opportunity,
Yes.
as opposed, there's no sort of final issue that I need to raise with you. We received the updated proof of evidence, or whatever we're calling it, from Mr. Sensical.
Yes, I think
Is it note or?
it's titled as a note. We're just
Note.
relying on how parties title
Sure.
documents.
So Mr. Sensicle's note we received yesterday. Mr.
Yeah.
Littlewood has reviewed that, and we want to reserve our position as to whether Mr. Littlewood should be given the opportunity to respond to what Mr. Sensicle has said in writing before he gives evidence.
Yes.
And I haven't, because we were wrapped up with the inquiry yesterday, we only received the document yesterday morning, I haven't actually had the opportunity to discuss it properly with Mr. Littlewood, but I just want to flag that up. I will take instructions and discuss it with him, but it may be, and I want to raise it now at the earliest possible opportunity, but maybe I'm coming back later today saying that we
Yes.
should be given that opportunity, which would obviously have implications for Mr. Littlewood giving evidence, and probably he wouldn't be able to give evidence today over to tomorrow on that basis if that requests were made and were of course acceded to you by
Yes.
yourself. So I just wanted to flag that up.
Okay, we have made it clear that if parties do put in later documents during the inquiry, as has happened with Mr. Sensicle's replacement, additional documentation, that if other parties need time to respond, that will be made available. Having said that, would there be the opportunity for Mr. Littlewood to start? I suppose the difficulty is if you're in discussion with him.
A, if I'm in discussion with him, and B, I think my preference, and I understand it on the basis of an informal indication discussion with Mr. Cambourne earlier, is that his preference would also be for Mr.
Yes.
Littlewood to give evidence in one block
Yes.
rather than it being split
Stop.
up.
Yes.
So I think that wouldn't be my preference, but if that were your preference, and we could explore whether we could make that work. But my inclination would be to say no to that.
Okay, well, bear that in mind then. Thanks, Mr. Parker. Is there anything else that you wish to raise?
No, thank you.
I understand there might be availability issues, but if the Thursday next week became free, that gives us would give time for Mr. Littlewood, but if Mr. Parker's not available, that doesn't solve the problem, but it'd be better to complete CPPF's case altogether, but I completely agree with Mr. Parker that it's not a good idea for a witness to give evidence on part of their evidence and then come back. It never quite works because people reflect on what they've said and to put it in the most politest possible way.
Okay. Mr. Adkin-Writer, you want to?
Yes, can I? Sorry, it was on a separate point.
That's okay.
Yeah. So it's just by way of an update for yourselves, I've been informed by the councils that the next iteration of the emerging local plan will be published next Friday, so on the 24th of October. So it's just a heads up, really, that we will be putting that in as an inquiry document. Mr. Kelly deals with the latest version of the emerging plan to now in his proof of evidence. The next version will be coming out after he gives evidence on the Tuesday next week, but I think he would like to address certain points in this new document that's coming out in writing. He won't be able to do that on Friday because that will be the day of publication, but within a few days after that, our intention would be to put in a short note just essentially updating those parts of his proof of evidence that deal with the emerging local plan. So just really a heads up on that point. so you know to expect that document coming in next week. Obviously, it will be a material consideration,
Yes.
and it's important that you're informed as to the council's position on that new document.
Indeed, yes. Has the council given thought to seeking a request to reschedule Mr. Kelly?
So as we had considered that, it's been quite difficult to find availability for
Yes.
Mr. Kelly. So I think it would still be helpful for him to come along on Tuesday and give his view, or present evidence on the matters he's covered in his proof of evidence. I'm not aware of any parties having requested to ask Mr. Kelly questions specifically, although there may obviously be members of the public who wish to ask him questions, and to deal with any additional points arising out of the new iteration of the emerging plan in writing. But given that we do have potentially have a bit more time now, if it was better to call him later in the inquiry, we could look at that as well.
You see, Mr. Underwood and I may well have questions on policy, but they may well be overtaken by what happens with the publication of the next iteration of the plan, and they may be more useful for us to make them. We won't be entering into an exchange of correspondence, but there may be questions posed by what he's going to put in writing rather than in person.
Well, I can explore his availability for the remainder of the inquiry.
I think we'd be grateful if you would, and then we can decide which is the way forward that we would like to suggest to you.
Thank you very much.
So just because I haven't got Mr. Kelly's proof already, can you just explain what the latest version is? What will be published on Friday?
So it's the next Regulation 18 version. I think the first version, the first proposals, was published in 2021. And then there was a short update, development strategy update in 2023. They're both in the core documents. I'm afraid I don't have the references to hand. And this is a further version of the Reg 18. What is going to be published is essentially the version of the plan that's going to the council's committees. So it won't be a final version that's going out to consultation. The intention is to consult on it in December. But it will be the next version produced by officers, and then that will go through the committee process with the aim of going out to the public in December. But it is obviously going to be a public document, and it shows how the council's thinking has developed as Mr. Kelly deals with in his proof on the basis of updated economic and housing forecasts and assessments that have taken place over the last couple of years. So it does show, a moving on of the council's position.
And again, just I made you know you referenced Tuesday. Was that just because that's when Mr. Kelly is due to give evidence, or was it?
So next Tuesday is when Mr. Kelly is due to give evidence, but obviously that's before the publication of the next iteration, which is next Friday, the 24th.
Oh, sorry, I got the wrong. So it's Friday the 24th.
Yes, yes. So it's just advance warning, really, and those documents won't be in the public domain. Mr. Kelly won't have reviewed them on Tuesday, so he won't be able to speak to them at all on next Tuesday.
I think if we can explore his availability, as Mr. Clegg said, I think that would be helpful if we could understand when he might be available, if not Tuesday in those circumstances.
I'll definitely make those inquiries.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any procedural matters they wish to raise? No? Right. Mr. Henderson, it's time to resume questions to Professor Hurst.
Grateful, sir. Thank you very much. Professor, we were dealing yesterday with my topic 3, your second issue, the TAD data book. We dealt with the May 2025 position, and I was asking you a series of questions about the May 2022, November 2022 point. And just to put this in context, your note yesterday, your paragraph 3, you set out in the green text on that page in from WSP, that is, they say in May 2023, when the modal shift assessment was updated, traffic modelling derived user emissions were not updated on the basis of proportionality as supported by the DFT's Jan 2014 guidance on proportionate updates. That's That's the WSP position in the green, and then you respond in your paragraph 3, this point is irrelevant, given that the November 2022 TAD data was always the appropriate data to use. And you refer us back to your point 2, yeah?
Yes, should I say why that is the case? that
Well,
it's
hang on.
relevant?
Well, let's look at what you say in your point 2. And the reason in your point 2 is the words in bold, where your work is due to report after this date, you should work to the updated values. That's the position you've set out there, isn't it?
Yes, that is the position. It wasn't an update. That this was the first time they were doing the calculations.
Sorry. Yes, I understand your point there. Yes, but your view, your reason is the bid in bold. But of course, the point that I put to you, which I think you now accept, is it's not just the words in bold we have to read. We also have to look at the words which follow in blue. Where your work is due to report after this date, you should work to the updated values or guidelines if it's appropriate to do so, following guidance in the proportionate update process. So
yes,
there's no.
so it's important that it's appropriate, but it's not an update.
Yeah, but when it refers to updated values in that blue text, what it's referring to there is updated values in the TAD data book, isn't it?
Correct. But later, when it's saying the proportionate update process, this is not an update. This is the first time that the calculations are being performed.
All right, fine. Now, in that context, we know we've got to look at the guidance, and we
Yes.
were looking at guidance in Appendix B. And the first point, it's Appendix B, I should say, to the carbon note. The first point there is the question of whether it makes any difference. The changes are not material to the decision at hand is the first bullet point.
Yes, my position is that they are material.
I understand that, and I'm going to ask you about that now. So can I ask you to pick up, please, Mr. Saunders' Appendix C?
Yep. Wait, I'll have to get that online. So I'm in his proof of evidence appendix.
Yes, and it's Appendix C, which is on, and the relevant page is PDF page 19.
Okay. I have it.
Now, the first column is the May 2023 assessment, so that is E-series, and that produces a net impact. And that net impact in terms of the environmental statement is a minor, beneficial, not significant impact, yes?
Yes.
And then the comparator in the next column, the updated assessment using tag 2022, so that's November tag 2022 in the F series. For the net impact there, that produces a figure of minus 30,000 in the penultimate row, yes?
That is what it says, yes.
And that figure there, in terms of the ES, is also a minor, beneficial, not significant impact, isn't it?
So the two figures, I believe that you're trying to say that they are somehow comparable, but the process by which they were derived is not.
Please.
These are not the two relevant comparisons that you're making.
I understand.
I mean, everyone can see the number. It says minus 30,000.
I understand
and
your
minus
point,
30,000.
but I need to ask you the questions. We need to take it in stages. And my question to you again. The minus 30,000 figure there is a minor, beneficial, not significant impact in terms of the ES, isn't it?
I mean, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So in terms of the ES, when we compare the first column with the second column, in both instances it comes out with a minor, beneficial, not significant impact for the purpose of the ES, doesn't it?
You're comparing two completely incomparable data sets.
I understand your point on that.
There is no basis to compare these two data sets. That's the issue.
I'm going to ask you about that, but just answer my question on the terms that I've put.
They both columns indicate, yes, a minor net.
Minor beneficial. Not significant impact.
Yeah.
And on that basis, on the basis of the comparison I've put to you, there is no material difference, is there?
You've compared completely inappropriate data sets for comparison.
Again,
so, no, I do not agree with you on that.
On the basis of the question I've put to you, when you compare those two, there is no material differences there.
Yeah, so when you compare the data set that they presented in the ES, which is in the first column, with the data set in the second column, which is completely inappropriate to use, then yeah, you would say there's no material difference, but they're not the appropriate data sets to compare.
Right, and fine. So on my basis, there's no material difference, but I understand.
But one is comparing E series and F series.
I understand.
That's the difference between these two data sets. What I'm saying should have always been there all along was the correct tag data set, which was the November 2022, with the E series. That doesn't exist on this document. It doesn't exist anywhere. You have never provided it to us.
Now, if the assessment had been updated in May of 2023, or indeed in 2024, as you wish to have seen it done, at that time, the available model was the F series, wasn't it?
So now we're moving forward in time here. There should have never been any need to update it because it should have been correct all along. And the correct all along comparison was the November 2022 data set with the E series. That was the correct comparison right from the beginning. That always should have been the case. And there is a material difference between the data set that was presented, which was the May 2022 tag data with the E series, and the data set that should have been presented, the November 2022 tag set with the E series. There is a significant material difference there.
And let's just think about this. If there'd been a calculation run in either 2023 or let's say 2024 just before publication, using the November 2022 TAD data book, as you say, the available transport model at that time was the F series, wasn't it?
I don't know precisely when it was uptaken, but I know it wasn't in the case of the environmental statement.
Well, let me show you that you're incorrect in that regard. If you go to CD1 2501, which is the transport assessment, which forms part of the environmental statement. And within...
sorry, I'm not there. CD 121...
No, 12501.
Sorry, I haven't quite got the number.
It's okay, 12501.
Yeah.
And if you go in that, please, to page 31, PDF 31, I should say.
Yeah.
Apologies, I'm finding it difficult to get to that document. Can you
Yes,
bear with me?
It's the transport assessment, so CD1.
My system's playing
I think
good.
we've got a...
Oh, sorry, it's not me. That's-
I think there's an issue with the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I can't get to it. I can make a note of the reference, but
Well, I think maybe I pause whilst we see if we can all get back on.
okay.
I know I've done something. It's a
It says there's access.
It's the worst nightmare.
Just take 5 minutes out while Mr. Underwood's got to work around with the phone, I think.
Okay, great stuff, thank you.
Sorry, it's not going to help anyone else, but it might help me.
Well, I'm absolutely fine. So if you're fine, then it's just then if Professor Hurst has got it.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Very relieved to hear that. So, Professor Hurst, if you go within 125.01 to PDF page, that is 31,
I am there.
you'll see the subheading Strategic Modelling. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And then 5.2.1 explains in the second sentence, the CSRM F series has been used as the basis for the assessment of the C2C stream. Do you see that?
Yes.
Right. So if before publication of the ES in 2024, a calculation had been undertaken on the basis of the November 2022 TAD data book, as you wish to have seen, the available model for the transport modelling for that purpose at that time would have been the F series, yes?
So are we saying a day before publication? So I'm not quite sure what exactly where we are with the timelines jumping around a bit here. Where are you talking about?
At any point up to 2024.
Well, I mean,
F series
presumably
model.
not in October 2022 when the calculations were first performed.
Okay.
Any point when?
Well, any point before the publication. Because
But
the point
not
is this.
October 2022?
Well, but do you accept it like this? For the purposes of the ES, okay, published in 2024,
Yeah.
if a calculation had been undertaken using November 2022 TAD data, the F series was the available model. Yes, you've just seen that, yes?
Yes.
And that calculation would have produced the figure that we saw in column 2 of Mr. Saunders' table 1, yes?
No, I think you're getting mixed up. It's actually column 3 now.
Well, the third column, the updated assessment using
Yes.
TAG 2020, that
Using
column.
tag 2025 now. The second column is using tag 2022 and only updating with F series. It's not actually labelled here.
That's the one that I'm asking you about, yeah, that column there.
Well,
If-
that would always have been an inappropriate thing to publish. That would have been wrong on multiple levels. The
No, no,
second
no.
column with tag 2022 but F series would always have been the wrong thing. It's the historic tag data set with the updated model.
Yeah.
There would have been no
And-
reason to ever publish
And
that.
using F series model with tag November 2022 would have produced the minus 30,000 figure there, wouldn't it?
I see what you're referring to. So let's say at some point before the release of the 2025 data,
Yeah, because we've dealt with the
but
2025
presumably
data.
after October 2022, when the F series wasn't available for them to use, or for whatever reason they didn't use if it was available, there would have been a time period when it may have been appropriate to publish column 2, because those were the two concurrent data sets. I see where you're referring to. Yes, there may have been a period in time when column 2 would have been appropriate.
Before 2024 when it was published, and that would have produced the minus 30,000 figure, wouldn't it?
That would have produced that figure.
Yeah. And therefore, for the purposes of the ES, published in 2024, if the calculation had been done in the way I've said, F series and TAG 2022 November, it would have produced materially the same outcome for the purposes of the ES. That's correct, isn't it?
By the time that publication happened, I think it may be acceptable to say that. But in the intervening period, when clearly the document was used, for example, when you brought up the reference to the council meetings, for example, when votes were made on this, I think it's quite possible that would not have been appropriate. I don't have the exact dates when the different things would have been appropriate, F series versus E series.
So on your basis, by the time of publication, that may have been appropriate.
Well, appropriate to some degree. Let's get this in context. Appropriate in the sense that you could shoehorn this into the guidelines and say that it somehow fits, but it is inappropriate on the basis of the many other factors that we've talked about.
And therefore, by the time we get to what the ES actually reports, it would have reported exactly the same thing of a minor beneficial impact, not significant, as it does in the form that was in fact published. That's right, isn't it?
Okay, so it all depends on what dates you're taking for when the dates of these things happened. So if you're taking the incorrect data set that was always incorrect, it was incorrect at the time, and the wrong data set was used, and then that was used in the decision-making process prior to the publication date of the ES that we have here. All of that happened. And there was no question that proportional update, which is what we're referring to here, was even required to be considered at that point. None of that was true. You only needed to follow the forthcoming guidance document to say that this was appropriate to do so. There was a material change at that time when those numbers were used, and the new numbers were going to become active anyway in just a few short days. So then, at some period of time, the intervening time, after lots of decisions have been made, after lots of carbon claims have been made, after people have been influenced in this way, there may have been an intervening period of time where you could have shoehorned what you have here in the updated, in column 2, into the environmental statement. Yes, but it would not have been a data set that would have reflected reality, and it would not have been a data set that people could have relied upon to project into the future.
Well, I understand your caveat about reality. We're going to come to that in the next topic. That's the first bullet point. Go back, please, to the carbon note and look at those bullet points again in Appendix B.
Sorry, the carbon note.
Yeah, CD 2963.
This is the tag. This is from WSP on Tuesday.
Right.
Yeah.
And on PDF page 32 is the first bullet point that we've just talked about, the materiality of the changes.
Apologies, I seem to have the wrong document.
Don't worry, I'll give you the reference again. CD 2963, PDF page 32.
Okay, yeah, so we're back talking about proportionate update again.
Exactly,
Yeah.
we've dealt with the first bullet point. If you turn over the page, please, to PDF page 33, look at the third bullet point. The risk of successful legal challenge is low. And in that regard, so it's not a team effort, I'm going to ask Professor Hurst the questions and she'll give her answers in the way she wishes to do so. In respect to the third bullet point, it is correct that whether the November 2022 or the May 2022 TAG data set was used, the use of the May 2022 data set does not give rise to a risk of successful legal challenge that is anything other than low, correct?
Okay, so you're saying that had they published the thing that they always should have published all along, that would not have shown a carbon benefit, versus what they did publish, which did show a carbon benefit, but was incorrect, there would be no risk of legal challenge that you had misled people, that you'd misrepresented. No. I mean, I'm not a legal expert, so I'm not going to comment on that, but I think misleading people, there's a good chance that there could be a legal challenge. And yes, clearly, you only need to read this paragraph, this section in full, to realise that we've already met the first criteria about material challenge. Yes, the material difference. Yes, there was a material difference between the May 22 and November 22 data set. So, to continue on seems like a waste of time.
So, can you or can you not help me on the risk of legal challenge on that third bullet point?
I think the lawyers and policy people would be much better placed to talk about the risk of legal challenge. I'm just saying that the data was materially different and would have misled people, yes.
And then the fourth bullet point, the risk of damage to the reputation of the analysis supporting the scheme or the department's wider portfolio is low. Well, that is clearly the case here because, one, you get to the same point of a minor beneficial impact anyway, and two, because when the point's raised, as you've chosen to do so, it's been dealt with through the update. So again, the risk in that regard is also low, isn't it?
Well, I think you obviously know I'm going to disagree with what you've said there. The risk to reputational damage is huge and profound. The Cambridge County Council and all projects in the region that are associated with net zero and low carbon, whether it's wind farms, whether it's solar farms, whether it's updated transmission lines or getting new storage, all of these projects are brought into question when you have such flimsy flimsy evidence which makes really no attempt to actually get to the heart of the issue, design a scheme that is low carbon, that can actually deliver net zero, and there were options available to do that. Here, it's a box-ticking exercise to try and pass the net zero criteria. So I think there's huge reputational damage, and in fact, personally, that's the thing I'm most concerned about.
And at the end of the day, when we look at all three of those bullet points, all are satisfied, and therefore when you apply the words in paragraph 1.3.4, it is reasonable to presume on that basis that the case for not adopting latest evidence would be stronger. That is precisely the case here, because at least those three bullet points are all satisfied in favour of not updating. That's right, isn't it?
So what I would say here is that I clearly disagree that these bullet points have been met, and I think I've laid that out clearly. So yes, certainly there was a case that proportional update should have been applied, but actually proportional update was never necessary. You should have used the correct data right from the beginning.
Now, your first critical issue, my topic 4, is the issue of linear recovery. Pick up...
Sorry to interrupt. I didn't want to interrupt my own friend's questions. I just want to repeat the point I made yesterday, which is all of these points about these specific points of the guidance are not covered in any way in the WSP. There's no evidence from the applicant that any of these points of guidance were considered at the time.
No, but all the questions relate to matters and documents which are before the inquiry, Mr. Parker, and that basis I'm content for the questioning to continue.
I'm grateful, sir. I won't repeat everything I said yesterday on that. So, moving on to topic 4, linear recovery, which is your first critical issue in your proof of evidence. Can I ask you to pick up CD 841, please? And can you go, please, to PDF page 76 within that document? And on PDF page 76, you'll see the subheading at the bottom of that page, steam level traffic modelling based assessment. Do you see that?
I see it.
And that is the assessment which applies in this case, isn't it?
So now we're referring to the most up-to-date simulations here, which would have used this guidance, yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
Now, if you turn over the page, please, to the table.
Yeah.
On table 713 on page 77.
Yeah.
And the assessment approach is summarised in the summary description, the second row. You extract linked data from a traffic model for both do minimum and do something scenarios. You apply calculations to estimate carbon emissions. You interpolate and you extrapolate this over the assessment period, and you work out the difference between the two scenarios.
Yes.
Now, in that regard, we get a more detailed explanation on page 78. So can you turn to that now, please?
I have it.
And what we see, if we start with 742, it explains that you use link-based approaches. That comes from the transport model, yes?
Yes.
And then the second sentence, VE chat available on request uses the data available in the tag data book and a link-based approach. And that's when the two are combined. So if you look, for example, at paragraph 7.43 on this page, you do your link-based assessment using a tool such as VCAT, which is 742, and then 743, to then calculate the annual emissions across the whole steam assessment period. The data should be interpolated. Linear interpolation is usually sufficient between the model years. And if you move down then to 746 at the bottom of that page, if the last modelled year is a long time, for example, more than 5 years from 2050, then a 2050 estimate for link flow and speed should be produced by extrapolating the latest model year's data and TAD data book 2050 data to capture the full extent of fleet composition changes published in the TAG data book. So that takes us up to the year 2050, yes?
Yeah.
All right. Now, pause in there. Up to the year 2050, that's not your issue. Your issue is what happens after the year 2050, isn't it?
So in the latest note, I should add, this really was where it was exposed exactly what had happened in some detail. So it became clear that actually pre-2050 this problem had applied. So usually it would be expected that you would also simulate your final year with 2050, and that had been my assumption prior to this, but it turns out that they had actually not done that, and so they had simulated. You can see this in the note, table 4. The years that were simulated. So actually my issue of the horizontal extrapolation actually goes from 2041, although in the most up-to-date calculations this was corrected and that extended out to 2050. So the problem specifically is with the horizontal extrapolation, and in the most up-to-date calculations that is from 2050, but there is some of these prior data sets have horizontal extrapolation pre-2050.
Now, so we know what the dispute is as things stand today, horizontal from 2050, so let's just focus in on that, please. So stay with the same document, CD 841.
Yes.
And move to the next page from the paragraph we were looking at, please. Page 79, paragraph 7.47.
Yeah.
First sentence, data for appraisal years beyond 2050 can be held constant up to the end of the assessment period, extrapolated horizontally. This is illustrated in figure 7.2. And if you look at figure 7.2, below,
yes,
you see at the year 2050, which is indicated at that point, the green line then moves horizontally in the way that is indicated there. Do you see that?
Yes, so in this guidance, they show an example where they extend out 7 years beyond the available data set. No. WSP then think it would be quite reasonable to continue on going for a further 50 years.
Now, what I've just read out to you, that first and second sentence in 747, is the default approach in this guidance, isn't it?
It's an approach that they say that you can use, but as you can see in that paragraph there, 7.47, alternatively, the annual change between the two final modelled years could be applied beyond the final modelled year if considered appropriate.
Exactly. And that alternative is one that you might go on if considered appropriate, but it is an alternative to the default in the first and second sentences, isn't it?
I don't see the use of the word default.
No, but when you read it normally as a piece of guidance, it tells you
I see that there are two options there, and they, DFT that is, think that it should be up to the scheme promoters to interpret that as best fits the scheme. And if you had a scheme indeed that ended in 2057, it might be quite reasonable just to extrapolate horizontally, but quite evidently, if you have a scheme ending in 2087, it is not.
Right, well, let's use your words options. Option 1 in those first two sentences, that was the option used in the ES, wasn't it?
Yes, no, actually. They used the horizontal extrapolation,
exactly.
But it wasn't the year 2050. It was actually the year 2036. So in the environmental statement, the calculation of carbon actually was made in that year 2036, and then it was every year post-2036 the same. And actually the amount of the electric vehicle uptake in 2036 at that time, this was with the May 22 data set, that was 27%. And so that basically would have assumed petrol plus diesel in 2087 was 73%. In 2087, 73% of the vehicles on the road are more than 55 years old. That's what would have had to have been assumed to follow this process. And so, yeah, I do think that it would therefore have been appropriate, the appropriate being the word that they use here, to use this alternative method that they provide.
Okay. Well, I'm going to come on to the alternative, but we'll just start with option 1. That was the one used in the ES, but more importantly, that was the one used in Appendix C in the final column, the penultimate column, I should say, of Table 1, the updated assessment F-Series plus TAG 2025, wasn't it?
Are you referring, what?
Mr. Saunders, Appendix C.
Mr. Saunders, Appendix C. I have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the third column.
The third column, the update appraisal there, used for what we're calling option 1 from that paragraph of the guidance, horizontal.
So I think this is actually ever so slightly different.
2050.
And of course, Mr. Saunders would be able to tell you in more detail, but I think that what they've shown here actually is post-2041. So I think that they take 2041 and then extrapolate horizontally.
No, that's not the case. It's from 2050, but subject to your concern about the date, it was horizontal extrapolation in accordance with option 1, yes?
I think it's 2041. I mean, Mr. Saunders is sitting right here. I don't know about the process of allowing him to respond, probably not. But, I mean, quite clearly we can see in the WSP note, Table 4, they list that when they simulate the year 2041 as year 2.
Yeah, but then it gets it. But then what you do from there is you go to the year 2050.
Then it's a horizontal extrapolation. It's not 2050. It's 2041. Now, they do, in the note, provide an update, which is post-2050. Yeah, so, yeah, they provide that. We can talk about that data set if you like.
We have, even if you want to use that, in the note, then you accept the note shows horizontal extrapolation from 2050 in accordance with option 1 of that paragraph of the guidance, yes?
If we're flipping to the note, then I think we should, because actually the numbers are different. Rather than being minus 7,000, I think it's minus 1,000. But yes, they use that horizontal extrapolation method.
Yeah.
Correct.
Fine. So, but your point is not that it is not about the numbers. Your point is simply that option 1 shouldn't have been used at all, is it? You say we should have used option 2.
Well, there's actually a third secret option. It's not that secret. Actually, DFT make it very widely published, and I believe it is even present in this document. They even tell you in this document you should look at it, which is the CAS. So you could have used option 2, or you could have used the CAS. Yes.
We'll deal with your option 3, but on your option 2, if we just look at paragraph 747 on PDF page 79 of 841, alternatively, the annual change between the final 2 modelled years could be applied beyond the final modelled year if considered appropriate. Now, if that had been done, and just using the graph immediately below, as an example, figure 7.2, you'd have found your 2 final years, so you'd have looked at 2046, 2047, yes?
So,
And
sorry, they don't look at 2046, they look at 2040, which data set are you talking about?
I'm looking simply at figure 7.2 below to illustrate the point.
Okay, so the exemplar piece, which has nothing to do with this exact scheme.
Yes, because we're just dealing with the principle. You take the final 2 years, you look at the change beyond that, and then you would draw your straight line in accordance with that change, wouldn't you?
So this straight... I don't actually understand the question. You're going to have to repeat it.
Yeah, of course. So if you look at 747, alternatively, the annual change between the final 2 modelled years...
Yeah, so which was 2032 and 2047 in this case.
...could be applied beyond the final modelled year if considered appropriate. Now,
yes, that is what could have been done.
Right. Now, if we had done that, if we'd found 2 years, found the change, and then continued the straight line based on that change from 2050...
Yes.
The result of that is that it would have got to a position where electric vehicle uptake went beyond 100%. That's right, isn't it?
I think it's quite clear when you have a straight line and when you have a line that has a gradient associated with it, at some point they are going to cross, yes.
Yeah.
At some point, electric vehicle uptake would have reached 100%, which is what we know to be the correct answer.
And because the assessment period continues for the 60 years plus the 2 years for construction, we wouldn't just have got to that point, and the straight line would have continued beyond that 100% point to the end of its assessment period. That's right, isn't it?
It would have gone to infinity eventually, yes.
Indeed.
But I think quite clearly no one is expecting you to simulate or calculate more than 100% electric vehicles.
Exactly.
That should be trivially obvious.
And that's why you don't support option 2 as it's explained there. You actually want option 3. Now, your option 3 is you start off on that approach until you get to 100%. And then at whatever year that is, you get to 100%, you then want to change from the line on the gradient to a horizontal line, as you explained yesterday. That's what you say should have been done, your option 3.
Well,
yes.
It's a combination of option 1 here and option 2, yes.
Yes, you want a combination. Now, the starting point is to say that combination is not expressed in paragraph 747 on PDF page 79, is it?
Well, they don't specifically say you could have a combination of these approaches. No. They don't specifically say these words, but I don't see anything precluding that.
Good. Right. Well, the reason it's precluded is because it gives you 2 options. It gives you option 1 in the first 2 sentences, or gives you an alternative option, option 2. It doesn't give you a mix and match, does it? That's obvious on the words on the page, correct?
I don't think that's obvious from the words on the page, no, that you can go to 100% and then stop. I think it's quite clear anyone who drafted this, and anyone, presumably anyone in this room, is not expecting you to go beyond 100%.
No. If we look, please, at your note, which is where you get into your option 3, can I ask you to go back to your note and look at your paragraph 11, please?
Back to my notes. I have it, yes.
Your paragraph 11, you start to explain your approach by reference to paragraph 3.25 of the QCG guidance, yeah?
Yeah.
And you set out that paragraph there, but I want to look at that paragraph in context. So can I take you back to CD 841, please?
Yeah.
And can you go within that, please, to page 23? And on page 23, you see the subheading user carbon at the bottom, yes?
Yes.
And then 324 gives us the context. This is about authorities should, as a minimum, develop and estimate future estimates using a business as usual scenario. Mm-hmm. That's the context. And then in that context, we get your paragraph 325, yes?
Yes.
Right. So with that in mind, can you turn back, please, to page 20?
Yes.
Do you see the heading at the top of the page 20, chapter 3, estimating current and future emissions at an area-wide level without intervention? Do you see that?
Sorry, I don't see what you're referring to.
Page 20 of CD 841.
Yeah.
At the top, chapter 3, estimating current and future emissions at an area-wide level without intervention in the green text. Do you see that?
Yes, I see it.
Yeah. So this chapter, in which paragraph 3.25 appears, is dealing with the estimation of current and future emissions at an area-wide level without any interventions. That's right, isn't it?
I'm reading 3.5 now, yes?
No, you're reading immediately at the top, the big green letters at the top of page 20, estimating current and future emissions at an area-wide level without intervention. You see those words?
I see those words.
So your paragraph appears within this chapter, which is dealing with area-wide assessments without intervention. That's right, isn't it?
It is within that. Chapter, yes.
Good. So can you turn back, please, to page 13, same document. And in fact, if you turn back to 12, I'll give you the full context. Do you see on 12 it says relevant stages of transport planning?
Yes.
2.6, the general stages of transport planning, this guidance provides carbon analysis advice for are as follows, and then turn over to 13. The first bullet point at the top of page 13 says strategic planning stage, e.g. local transport plans. Do you see those words?
Yeah.
And at the bottom of the paragraph it says methods and advice for undertaking this analysis to inform the planning stage is provided in chapters 3. Do you see that?
I do.
And that reiterates the point that I've put to you and is obvious from chapter 3 itself, which is the methods and advice, including your paragraph 3.25, is directed at strategic planning, for example, local transport plans. That's right, isn't it?
That appears to be what this says.
Yeah. It is not dealing with scheme development. So if you look at the next bullet point, do you see that as dealing with scheme development?
Yeah.
Advice on the assessment of carbon in transport scheme development is provided in chapters 5, 6, 7 and 8. Do you see those words at the end?
Yeah.
And that would include, for example, the guidance which we already agreed was applicable, namely that starts at page 76 and paragraph 7.42, 7.43 through to 7.47, which we looked at earlier. That's correct, isn't it?
I don't really see the necessity for this distinction between these two cases, because I see that this scheme is significant in a local transport plan and strategic context. That's why we're all here. And so I think understanding the carbon in that context is important. So I feel, yes, if you were purely going by a scheme development plan, you probably look on those chapters, but it doesn't preclude the existence of the other guidance either.
Well, the short point is this. Once you've realised the distinction that you've made, your third approach, your mix and match approach, starts from guidance which is not applicable to the assessment of schemes such as ours. Instead, it is applicable to the assessment of strategic plans like the local transport plan, with which we are not concerned. That's right, isn't it?
I am not familiar with a policy on that level, so I don't know about a policy on that level.
Well, but even just as a clearly somebody who's read into this, somebody reading these words, it is apparent that the guidance that you are seeking to rely on is not directed at scheme development, it's not directed at this sort of project, instead it's directed at an entirely different exercise, namely local transport plans. That's right, isn't it?
I think this scheme does fit in with strategy. I think this scheme is significant in that context. And I think these were methods that DFT make available to allow you to get a better match on reality in planning your scheme.
But you're not saying that the scheme like this is something that fits into the box of strategic planning like local transport.
At no point have I ever said that you should not be using the business as usual and that the tag was the core. That was the core, but there were methods that you could have applied and that DFT make available which would have given you a better match to reality.
Mr. Henderson, I think we're probably going over the same.
Well, I'm
ground.
grateful you've got the point, so I'm happy with the answers I've got. I just want to go back to your note then, please.
Can I just check on timing? I think
Well, we're
perhaps
still
coming towards the end of your time estimate.
It is, but as I said yesterday, we're going to go over. We're not too far away though, so we've got
Good. I hope so.
a bit more to do. We then get, though, to your mix and match is CHAS, yes?
I would hardly call it a mix and match. I would say it's the obvious implementation of the wording.
Right, and if we just go back to your note, please, paragraph 11.
Yeah.
I've looked at the blue text, 3.25, the next black text, the references to the Common Analytical Scenarios data book, which is a DFT document that supplements the TAD data book. First thing to say, and I think you've said it in your previous answer, the TAG data book is the core document, isn't it?
Yes, but DFT want you to. They appreciate that the calculations are very sensitive to fleet composition, and they want you to test these scenarios.
And
they want you to be able to confirm that, and that's why they make them available to you.
And when we go back to the relevant guidance, so go back to 841 and go back to PDF page 78, please.
Okay.
And when you look firstly at 7.41, at the top, VE, second sentence, VE chart available on request, use the data available in the TAD data book and a link-based approach. And then if you look at 746 at the bottom of that page, first sentence, that also refers you to extrapolating the model's year's data and TAD data book 2050 data to capture. So the relevant guidance in this relevant section of this document is all based on the TAD data book, isn't it?
I do not believe that CAS is mentioned within this chapter, if that's what you're saying.
That's exactly right. And the point that follows from that is the use of CAS in the way you've suggested is not supported by the specific guidance for scheme level modelling in this document. That's right, isn't it?
The use of CAS would have been entirely appropriate to test the validity of your approach with TAG, to give your client a much better view of actually how much carbon they could meaningfully recover, and so the public could have confidence in the simulation.
And when we go back to your note, please look at your Appendix A, where you extract the worksheet that you're most interested in.
Yeah.
Do you see that? Worksheet T4, mileage splits in the technology scenario. See those words?
Yes.
And when one goes and looks at the CHAS data book, what you see is a whole range of different scenarios for different events depending on different forecasts. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
And the
they
one
have
that,
7, I think.
Yeah, and the one that you've selected is T4 technology scenario, yes?
Yes.
And that is not the same as the other scenarios in the data book, is it?
Well, it's not identical. There are 3 scenarios that deal with fleet composition, and all 3 give this data value in 2050, which is less than 1%. The others point you to TAG. They're not concerned with fleet composition. They're about other things.
Yeah. So, what we have and what is apparent from here is that this is not the forecast in TAG. This is simply a scenario where other values are changed to produce another look forward in terms of the forecast. That's right, isn't it?
The values in CAS are not the values in TAG. They are there to supplement TAG to allow scheme promoters to test the validity of their approach and test other scenarios.
Yeah. Now, the next point that you make in your note, just going back to your paragraph 12, you say in the second sentence that you accept that vehicle usage shouldn't go beyond 100%. You then say in your third sentence, given a 2030 ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles, this seems more likely not, and it's, for example, reflected in the Common Analytical Scenarios database. So your point is that the 2030 ban is, in your view, reflected in the CAS databook, yes?
Well, they align, yes,
Yeah.
in that sense.
Go please to CD 842. And it's an Excel document, which I'll need you to open up, please.
I have it. This is the TAG book, May 2025. This is the most recent TAG.
Exactly so. And at the bottom, can you go please to the tab that says A1.3.9?
Yes. This is the fleet composition tab.
Exactly. And when you get to A1.3.9, look at the, you'll maybe have to zoom in, or your eyesight may be better than mine. If you look at the notes.
Sorry, can you just hold on a second? Mine's
Of course.
took a while to download.
Mine's just dropped out again, I'm afraid.
Oh my God.
Yes, and he's open that.
I'm grateful. And so if you zoom in, as I hope you've had the opportunity, Professor Hirsch, you'll see notes 2. They represent the government current policy reference scenario, meaning they reflect all agreed policies where decisions on policy design are sufficiently advanced to allow robust estimations of impact. That includes the 2030 ban that you've referred to, doesn't it?
Represent the government's current policy scenario. Yes.
So
this is the most up-to-date.
Sorry, can you direct me?
yes,
to where
so
note
if
is?
you zoom in, you'll see the box headed notes. The top of tab A1.3.9. Sorry, I hate cross-examining by reference to Excel documents. They never work.
I'm probably just being a bit dense.
Okay, so if
I
you've
can't
opened the
see any of
document,
those notes.
if you go to the bottom, so you should see all the tabs.
Yep.
I'm sorry, you've probably done this already, but let me talk you through it. And then there's one that says A1.3.9.
Ah, that's what Gotcha. Ah, right. Thank you.
You got it, great.
then.
No, it was my fault, I'm sure. And the second note there says it represents, cutting to the chase, it represents current government policy. That includes the 2030 ban that you refer to, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. That they would be considering that.
And therefore, having regard to that ban is not a point of distinction between the TAD data book or the CAS data book, because they both take that into account, don't they?
Sorry, the TAG databook and the CAS databook take.
The 2030 ban into account, don't they?
So the CAS and the TAG are very different, and you could say they would both be aware, when preparing those documents, the preparers certainly would have been aware of this 2030 ban. For both the case of TAG and the case of CAS, they are both very different.
And therefore, in using the data which we see on this page from May 2025, that is data which is informed by the 2030 ban that you referred to in your paragraph 12, correct?
Yes.
Right. So when we step back then, the approach which you now suggest should have been used, your option 3, is one which is based on guidance that is not relevant to stream development and is based on a scenario which is outside of the core in the TAD data book, and which is not justified by the 2030 ban because that's already been taken into account. That's the position we reach, isn't it?
I think you know I'm going to say no to that, and all of my responses have been no, so that's not correct. I think that it was entirely appropriate to use the data and the methods that were laid out in the QCG document, explaining how you could better calculate carbon recovery to give Cambridge County Council and the public a much more accurate picture of what they might anticipate in terms of carbon recovery. DFT gave you all the tools in which to do that.
Now, the final point on this topic, when we pick up the QCG guidance, please, and go back to that paragraph 7.47 on PDF page 79, option 2, that only appeared in the version of this guidance which was published in August 2025. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that wasn't available. August 2025, sir. You'll see that on page 1. And therefore that wasn't guidance that was available at the time of the preparation of the environmental statement, was it?
That would be correct to say. However, the CAS was available. That was published in August 2022.
Thank you. So at the time of the environmental statement, there was only one option. That was option 1, and that was applied, wasn't it?
No, that's exactly not what I said. I said the CAS was available, so that would be option 2.
But to get to that, you've got to go through paragraph 325 in a different part of the guidance, yes?
Well, you would have to have some willingness to think about the scheme's recovery in a larger context, yes.
And the short point is, to get to your approach, your position is that there should have been a departure from the guidance. That's your position.
No, my position is that you should have followed the guidance in full.
Now, the penultimate topic, my topic 5, is the comparative assessment. In your rebuttal proof, you make brief commentary on the comparative assessment in Mr. Saunders' rebuttal proof of evidence appendix B. But do you accept, firstly, that comparative assessment wasn't based on a full rebuild, as Mr. Johnson explained in his oral evidence? Instead, it was based on...
Sorry, I'm afraid you're going to have to refer... I don't know what you mean by the comparison.
Sure. So I'll take it in stages. If you go to your rebuttal proof of evidence, please.
Yeah.
And if you look at your paragraph 1.4 there.
Rebuttal to the proof of evidence.
Yep.
Sorry.
Do you have that?
I do, yeah.
And at paragraph 1.4, you comment on the calculations of carbon
yes.
for the CPPF alternative stream, yes?
Yes.
And those calculations are in Mr. Saunders' appendix 3. I'll take you there, appendix B, sorry, so you can look at those. So go to that.
I have it.
And you understand that was based on the assumption that what would happen to the existing road is that it would be extended either to the north or to the south as appropriate to meet the CPPF design. Do you understand that?
Which part of the evidence are you referring to here? So which
yeah.
text are you referring to?
Well, so for example, if you look in the comparison box,
Yes.
you see, for example, the alternative has minus 28% less asphalt, 38% less imported aggregate soil, because the assumption was what CPPF wanted to do was to extend north or south, yeah?
I don't see anything about extending north or south in this document that you're talking about.
Well, let me put the point. Do you accept that this is not based on a full rebuild, as Mr. Johnson explained in his oral evidence? Because that's the first time he'd talked about a full rebuild, so logically couldn't have been.
This is your evidence.
Yeah.
I'm actually really not making much comment on whether it was well prepared or not well prepared. My only comment here is that the number is lower.
Yeah.
18,000 is lower than 29,000.
And my simple point is this: when you realise that it's not an extension, it's in fact a full rebuild, as Mr. Johnson now tells us, and when you realise that instead of just going across the existing bridge, we now need to add in a new concrete bridge over the M11, when you take both of those new factors into account for Mr. Johnson's oral evidence, the inevitability is the gap is going to close, isn't it?
I think that is incorrect, but we're moving beyond the bounds of the evidence that I'm giving. We're now talking about the detail of the PPF scheme, and I think we've had much more proficient witnesses, Edward Lee, for example, speaking about whether or not that bridge would be actually necessary or not. I think the inspectors have heard from much more experienced people on this. So, no, I don't accept that. Equally, I think it's entirely believable that a scheme that requires much less intervention, the CPPF scheme, would release less carbon. That seems obvious.
Now, well, let's... If you're not the right witness, then that's as far as I'm taking it. Your final topic, the net emitter point. So go back to your note and look at your paragraph 18.
Yeah.
Had WSP used the QCG approach, which permitted linear extrapolation until the EV fleet composition reached 100, and fixed at 100 for the remainder of the assessment period, so that's the option 3, that you've called it, this approach would have been reasonable and it would have eliminated any carbon saving, leaving the scheme a net emitter. That's your conclusion there, yes?
So the option 3 thing, that was you that called it option 3. I didn't call it option 3. I think that is entirely permissible within the paragraph, within the text that was written. The option 3 thing, that's your addition.
Okay, well, let's use my shorthand, but the shorthand is this: you've got to go in the straight line to 100% and then you cut it off horizontally. It's
Yes.
on that basis you say that the scheme would have been a net emitter.
Yes.
Right. You don't go any further. You don't, for example, deal with it in terms of policy or anything like that, do you?
Is there something specific that you're getting to? I don't quite...
Well,
that's the end of the note, if that's what you mean.
And that's as far as you go in your evidence, yeah? You don't say there's any policy consequence which follows from that, do you?
So I'm not an expert in policy. The scheme would be a net emitter.
Fine. Now, I won't ask you about the policy, but I want to ask you in terms of the QCG guidance, which you do refer to.
Yes.
Can you go to PDF page 56, CD 841?
So you said PDF page 56?
56, sir, yes. CD 841, the QCG guidance.
I'm there.
And do you see paragraph 6.24 at the bottom?
Yeah.
A DFT review of carbon assessment has shown that many steam assessments, including of steam supporting a modal shift to active and shared modes, indicate steams will cause a net increase in whole life carbon emissions, i.e. construction stage capital carbon emissions may not be paid back by use stage user carbon reductions, e.g. modal shift. When considering such results in decision making, it's recommended that the strategic fit of steams with the outcomes identified as necessary to decarbonise local transport are considered. And then quantitative WLC assessments typically consider a steam's impact in isolation and will not account for the potentially larger carbon savings that some steams might enable if delivered in combination of wider policies and interventions. So what this guidance is saying is if you reach the conclusion that you reach that you might have a net emitter, that's not the end of the picture. You go on to consider, as it puts it here, a question of strategic fit, yes?
Yes, strategic fit would be relevant.
Now, if we think about that, We have a scheme which is in accordance with local transport planning policy. Mr. Baker explained it, no challenge on that point by my learned friend, and no evidence led by Mr. Littlewood in his written evidence. So the common ground is this is a scheme that accords with local transport planning policy. You understand that?
I'm sorry to interrupt here. If we're going to go on and apply this paragraph of the guidance, my own friend needs to take me to the applicant's assessment of where this guidance has been applied, where the wider impacts of the scheme have been considered. There's no evidence before this inquiry that any of this has been done. So and my learned friend can't put questions to Professor Hurst by reference to a case which simply isn't before you.
Well, sir, I don't accept that at all. We've got a note that arrived yesterday that says if you take my approach, you're a net emitter. So the guidance says, well, if you're a net emitter, you go on and you look at this. And so I'm going to ask her, by reference to what is already in the documents, I can take her to Mr. Baker's proof in due course, but there's no challenge on this point, but I can take her there if she needs to see it, that this is something that complies with local transport policy. And then we've got to think about, well, if this witness wants to make that claim, she's got to follow it through, she's got to apply the guidance in its entirety, and she doesn't do that.
No, that's wrong. It's been the CPPS case from the outset that this scheme has been a net emitter. If the applicant wanted to put evidence before you on a without prejudice basis as to what the consequences of that were if Professor Hurst was right, the applicant has had every opportunity to do that, including, and my own friend suggests, well, a note came from Professor Hurst yesterday. That was because the note from WSP came less than something like 24 hours before that, when we've had weeks between, frankly, Mr. Saunders giving his evidence. So to criticise Professor Hurst providing something at the last minute is frankly disingenuous.
So,
the applicant's had every opportunity to explore the possible consequence of Professor Hurst's evidence. There's no evidence before you in relation to this wider guidance, and it is inappropriate to cross-examine Professor Hurst on this point without having foreshadowed it in the evidence in any way, shape or form.
I think on this occasion, Mr. Henson, Mr. Parker does have a point in terms of the extent of the questioning, and I am concerned that you're asking Professor Hurst about policy matters as well.
Well, so I'm asking about the guidance, and what I rely on, I can show you Mr. Baker's proof of evidence. His section 6.2 on his page 30 starts, does the scheme comply with transport policy? He then addresses immediately the local transport and connectivity plan, and he goes through all of that, and he explains in that whole section, leading to his conclusion at paragraph 6.2.9, that there is compliance with the current transport strategy. So what I need, the evidence I need, is there. On the question of strategic fit with the local transport plan, it's all in Mr. Baker's proof. That's what I rely on, sir. So I don't accept this. All I'm putting to this witness is when you turn to the guidance and you look at the question that it asks you to do, which is a question that Mr. Baker has answered. He has answered the question, is there a strategic fit in his evidence? That has a direct consequence for this guidance. So I'm relying specifically on that part, specifically on what it says about local transport, and that's been in the evidence from the outset, sir. I don't accept what my learned friend says about this being some new point. It is specifically there, and it's there for a reason. And I've got to ask her about this because it's in the guidance and she's failed to apply it properly.
But in terms of asking whether there's compliance with guidance and policy, I'm not convinced.
Well, I'm taking it on the basis...
That's a matter for this witness.
Well, I'm taking it on the basis that it's out there is compliance because no one's ever challenged that. Mr. Parker could have asked Mr. Baker about these paragraphs. He just didn't do it, sir. So I can then put it to this witness on the basis, well, that's accepted. Because if it's not accepted, it should have been in Mr. Littlewood's proof of evidence. It's not. Or it should have been put to my witness by Mr. Parker. He didn't. And therefore it's perfectly fair for me to put the question on the basis that it's common ground, there is compliance with the LTCP as it's explained there, sir. And to be clear, I don't ask her to address whether there is or isn't compliance, I asked her to address the question on the basis that there is for the reasons that I've given.
Well, with that caveat...
With that caveat, sir, can I put the question, please?
You can put the question, but I don't want a repetitious series of questions on this.
That's fine. It's a short point, sir. And again, if I'd actually got...
And if Professor Hurst is not able to give you an answer on this, I'd be grateful if you'd just move on.
That's fine. Well, it's the last topic in any event. So go back to CD 841. Look at paragraph 6.24.
I'm there.
So the question of strategic fit with outcomes identified as necessary to decarbonise local transport. We have compliance with the local transport plan. Assume we do. Yes?
I'm not going to comment on the local transport.
Assume we do. If we do, We know that the local transport plan is directly aimed at decarbonisation, yes? You know that? You want to see it?
I don't want to see it. I can believe that that is one of the stated aims.
Exactly.
Yes.
So on that basis, if we have a fit with the local transport plan, and if we have a local transport plan that goes directly to decarbonisation as one of its objectives, what we have in the terms of this guidance is compliance with paragraph 624, isn't it?
Okay. So my understanding is that you're saying we're compliant on the basis of strategic fit, even if we're not meeting the criteria of decarbonisation directly, just in the case of the busway.
Apply in 624,
I think
that's right.
there's a nuance here that is worth mentioning, that the calculations that are provided actually are not in isolation. The calculations for carbon recovery actually relate to general changes in traffic in the area. They don't just relate to people taking the bus, which would be, I think, what you might consider the scheme taken in isolation. Actually, the vast majority of the savings come from the general traffic changes. So I would say that actually it's not in isolation already in the calculations that you've made. So that's the only addition I have to add.
That's a helpful caveat, because that rather undermines the importance of seeing this in the context of the LTCP as a whole, doesn't it? Because we're looking at matters in the round in Greater Cambridgeshire. That's fair, isn't it?
Well, in that case, you would have to remove those general changes in traffic flow altogether within your calculations, which would leave you with a ludicrously polluting solution. You will recover almost no carbon from your modal shift. So if you're prepared to concede that point, then we have a completely different case on our hands in the terms of carbon.
And at the end of the day, you are not saying, and you can't say in light of this guidance, that even if there's a net emitter, that therefore relates or equates to unacceptability for a new public transport scheme. You don't say that, do you?
I'm absolutely mindful that the inspectors will have many different considerations when thinking about this and relating it to policy in terms of strategic fit, and that the fact that it's a net emitter may not be sufficient for them to preclude this development. I can understand that may be the case, but these are points beyond my knowledge, and the inspectors are much better placed to judge these factors.
And then in terms of scheme aims, which you do make a point on, if you pick up CD 104, please.
CD 104.
You started your evidence in chief by saying you thought there was a conflict with one of the scheme aims. Can you identify for me precisely which scheme aim that is?
Sure. I have it written out in
Scheme objectives at paragraph 4.1 and the aims are at 4.2. Is it one of those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it is to assist in moving to a low carbon economy.
Could you give me the paragraph reference, please?
It's 4.2.4.
4.2.4.
To enhance quality of life.
All right, and then it's the final part of 4.2.4, the words, and assist in moving to a low carbon economy. At first point, it doesn't say the aim is not to deliver a scheme which will itself be net zero, is it?
I would have to agree with you that these are slightly weak words given the extent of promotional material surrounding net zero in this scheme. However, I think it is clear that it's wanting a low carbon solution. And low carbon is the word.
And even on your basis, even if there is a net emitter, if it's a good strategic fit with the LTCP, then it will, to take you back to 4.24, it will assist in the move to a low carbon economy, won't it?
Well, I disagree with that, because if something is a net emitter, that means it's implicit that you are emitting more carbon than you would have done had you done nothing. You're emitting more carbon, so I don't see how emitting more carbon is compatible with the words here, low carbon.
It's compatible because the step you're missing out of account is the strategic fit with the LTCP, which goes directly towards that aim. When you take that into account, even if it's a net emitter, because there's a good strategic fit, you assist in moving to a low carbon economy, don't you?
So I have not conceded it's a good strategic fit. My view is that I'm not the appropriate witness to ask, and I'm sure the inspectors will have a clearer view on that.
Well,
so
if it
I'm
is-
unable to assist you with this because I don't agree with that point. As I said, I'm not making a case on that point.
And because you can't assist me, what you fail to do in reaching your judgment on 4.2.4 is apply the guidance in full. That's right, isn't it?
I disagree with that point.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Professor Hurst, I'd just like to ask you one thing. One of your points is that there's an overestimation of carbon recovery in the proposed scheme, and that reductions associated with the move to electric vehicles has already occurred or is occurring ahead of what's in the documentation put by the applicants.
Sorry, the question is, has the EV transition already happened, or is it...
It's happening at a faster rate.
It's happening at a faster rate than perhaps could have been anticipated, admittedly, at the time of the ES's publication and at the time of the original calculations. And to try and respond to that, DfT is introducing new data sets and new methods to try and allow scheme promoters to better reflect the reality.
Well, that isn't reflected in what's been put forward.
Those changes are only partially reflected in that they have accepted they need to use more up-to-date data sets, but their methodology is still seriously lacking.
But in terms of the reality of what's actually happening, if those changes have occurred or are occurring at a faster rate, the benefits are there in any event, aren't they? Because you've got the transition, even if it's not reflected in what's being put forward by the applicant.
Yes, absolutely. So the key point here is that you would have those benefits if you did nothing. Here, you make the choice to emit 29,000 tonnes of carbon, and that doesn't help you recover any carbon. That's the key point, is that you're emitting a huge amount of carbon, and actually, even more so, you could have had a good transport scheme that emitted much less carbon if you'd chosen a scheme, or right from the outset, from the design stage, you'd been working towards a scheme that focused on emitting less carbon, i.e. less intervention.
But the modal shift is occurring in any event.
So the shift to EV, you mean? Yes, the shift to EV occurs in any event. The key is you could avoid emitting these huge amounts of carbon associated with the infrastructure. So that's the concrete, for example.
And the only other thing I want to ask you is a point of detail. When our report's produced, at the back of the document there will be a list of appearances of people who are present at the inquiry, and it's usual to give the status, the standing of somebody in relation to that. In view of what you said when you were introduced to the inquiry yesterday, should we refer to you simply as a local resident? Because as I understand it, you're not here representing the university.
I'm not here representing the university, but I'm also not here particularly as a Coton resident. I'm here as someone who cares about carbon and, as I outlined at the beginning, the provision of proper and reliable evidence on carbon to the public. So
what handle would you like us to record you as?
I'm not really sure what appropriate options there are. I mean, I'm someone who cares about carbon.
Mr. Parker?
I wonder whether we could just indicate afterwards.
Of course, yes.
I think ultimately, Professor Hurst, is up to you, is what the inspectors are saying.
Okay.
So, but we can perhaps update you afterwards.
That's absolutely fine, Mr. Parker. Thank you very much, Professor Hurst.
I do have some.
Yes.
I'll try and be as quick as possible, but because I think we've done carbon, haven't we? But I just want to pick up a couple of points. Just on the question there that was put at the end by Inspector Clegg about, the transition to EV is happening faster than anyone anticipated, and it's happening irrespective, as it were, in any event, irrespective of the scheme.
It's irrespective of the busway. It's actually even irrespective of UK policy. It goes way beyond that.
So just to be clear, in terms of the quantification of where the carbon effects of this scheme, what implications does that have for the carbon benefits or the carbon disbenefits of this scheme if EV uptake is faster than anticipated?
So the key here is that electric vehicles emit far less carbon, and by 2050 it will be negligible amounts of carbon, and so therefore their faster uptake will mean that either vehicle kilometres directly taken off the road or changes in traffic have a much less significant effect in terms of carbon recovery, moving towards nil.
Just slow down a bit.
Oh, sorry. I'm aware that everyone's on the it's been a long time talking about this, so, but I can go slower. So, yeah, the carbon recovery will move to nil if you have no petrol and diesel emitters, which we know will be the case.
Okay. One final question, just to try and be absolutely clear. If EV uptake is faster than anyone anticipated, would that be likely to increase the carbon benefits that are derived from the scheme? Or would it be likely to decrease the carbon benefits that one derives from the scheme?
So if EV uptake is faster, that's going to mean that you decrease any carbon benefit. So it becomes more polluting in terms of CO2. But if I may just correct you, faster than anyone anticipated it was anticipated in the CAS document and in many of their analytical scenarios that they provided, even at the time of the individual environmental statement. So it wasn't that no one anticipated this.
Perhaps my question should have been phrased by reference to what the applicant anticipated.
Exactly, from what the applicant anticipated, yeah.
Thank you. Then I want to ask you about one question about the guidance in relation to the CAS data book, which is an alternative data source which you have, as it were, promoted, and not one that the applicant has referred to in its documents. So just on that specific scenario, you were asked a series of questions by Mr. Henderson about the document at CD 841 and the appropriateness of referring to the CAS data set in relation to the assessment of individual schemes by reference to area-wide policy interventions. Do you remember that series of questions?
Yes, I do.
And it was put to you that it wasn't appropriate to use, or at least the terms of the guidance recommended that the CAS data be used in relation to area-wide assessments rather than scheme developments.
Yes.
Yeah, you recall that series of questions. Now, I just want you to turn, please, within the guidance to page 42.
Sorry, could I just get the number again?
CD 841.
CD 841.
And I'm going to ask you to turn, please, particularly to page 42, but we're in a section 5, which starts on page 39.
Yeah.
Carbon assessment at a scheme level throughout design and business case stages.
Yeah.
And if you can just turn to the figure on page 42, we can see there it's headed example process of early stage scheme development and where carbon evidence and assessment methodologies can support this.
Yeah.
And we can see the various stages, but we can see on the right hand side reference to chapter 3 of the guidance.
Yeah.
Let me ask you another question. What do you take from this figure in terms of the appropriateness in principle of referring to the CAS data set in the options assessment of schemes?
Absolutely. This figure actually is a great one to clarify.
I didn't ask about options assessment. I asked about the assessment in the environmental statement. So not clarificatory of the question that I asked by reference to the EF. This is asking a different question about options assessment.
No.
Impermissible.
No, Mr. Henson's questions were put to Professor Hurst on the basis that it wasn't appropriate within terms of this policy to refer to the data set which is in chapter 3. It's perfectly permissible for me to put this by reference to the questions that he's asking.
Mr. Henderson, I think you did ask Professor Hurst about the distinction between scheme-wide and area-wide.
I absolutely accept that.
Yes.
When you look at this figure, you'll see that the part that I was dealing with, the scheme, was 6 to 8 at the bottom. The question my learned friend put was by reference to options assessment. That's how he put his question. He can't put his question by reference to options assessment because that was no part of my cross-examination. My cross-examination is about the calculation in the ES, applying this guidance, including, I should say, as Professor Hurst accepted, the relevant part which starts on page 76 of paragraph 7.37 and following. The question is asking you a different thing about options appraisal.
Well, I'm not convinced about that, Mr. Henderson, but I think, Mr. Henderson, there's perhaps a tendency to lead in the question.
Well, I was.
I mean, I'd be happy to.
I'm happy to point to the figure and do no more than ask what Professor Hurst draws from this figure in terms of the relevance of the data that she referred to.
To respond to Mr. Henderson directly, to get to stages 6 through 8, one presumably must have undertaken the preceding stages. And really this was the point I was trying to say in words, but the figure does it so much better, that you must consider a fuller context, obviously. And it specifically identifies here that right in those earlier stages, you should have been using the materials available in Chapter 3, which relate to the comparison, for example here, on the right here, comparison of emission estimates with decarbonisation ambitions. So all of this that was available in Chapter 3, which was the CAS data set, which should have allowed scheme promoters to really design schemes that were really positive in terms of net zero, either wasn't followed or hasn't been presented.
Thank you. And then I want to come on to where we get to with Mr. Saunders or the WSP note, and I just want to remind ourselves of what that says. Can you take out CD 2963, please? Sorry, actually, can we take out your note? I think it's clear. It's easier to refer to it in your response note. And I'd like you, please, to turn to your table, which I think is on page...
It's page 3.
3, yeah. And we'll recall the key analysis, because it's where the applicant gets to, is in the final column on the right-hand side, July 2025 assessment, tag May 2025, new QCQ methodology, and we can see the net impact is minus 1,446.
Correct. That is,
That depends on a linear extrapolation of the fleet composition from 2050.
Yeah.
And you will recall you were asked a series of questions about whether it was appropriate to extrapolate linearly from 2050 by reference to the guidance which is at CD 841. So I want to go back to that guidance, and in particular the guidance on, sorry, I've now lost my notes. Page 47.
Page 47 of
CD 841, we're in chapter 6. Sorry, that's not the right reference. I need to... Sorry, page 79. Get there eventually. This is the key paragraph of the guidance, paragraph 747, that you were asked to consider by Mr. Henderson. And just to recall the series of questions, we can see data for appraisal years beyond 2050 can be held constant. Alternatively, the annual change between final two model years could be applied beyond the final model year if considered appropriate. And it was put to you that there was a default option, an alternative option. You said, no, there's two options. And it was put to you that the option that you were proposing, that's to say, continuation of the trend between the final two modelled years until you reach 100% and then horizontal extraction, was not an option that was provided for in the guidance, and you gave your answer, well, yes, it is provided for in the guidance.
Right.
So that's where we got to with Mr. Henderson. Now, as a matter of law, you follow the policy unless there are good reasons not to. I want you to assume, hypothetically, that your approach of extracting between the two modelled years until you reach 100% EV uptake, and you get to 100%, is a departure from the guidance. That's what Mr. Henderson would have you believe. That's what he's going to submit to the inspectors.
Yeah.
That's not your case, but that's what he was putting to you. Yeah.
Can you move to the question, please?
Yeah. What would you say about that approach? Are there? Sorry, Mr. Henderson. Do you want to? I'm trying to concentrate on the question, but if there's something you want to.
Wait for the answer to the question.
So the inspectors will need to exercise a judgment as to whether it's appropriate to depart from that guidance, whether there are good reasons to depart from that guidance.
If you say it's a departure.
If you say it's on Mr. Henderson's case, it's not your case, Mr. Henderson's case, you have to decide whether it's appropriate to depart from the guidance. What would you say if the inspectors are having to decide whether there's good reason to depart from the guidance on that analysis of the guidance? What would you say they should do?
So I think at the heart of this, you should reference the thing that's most important of all, which is that does the carbon recovery reflect reality? I think we've well established that it does not, and there are several places within evidence that indicate that there were other methods that could have been used that would suggest it departs from reality. We know that in 2080 there won't be 2087 we won't have 18% of vehicles on the road being petrol plus diesel. That should be obvious, but it's also present in the CAS guidance, it's present in the linear extrapolation method. So the reason to depart from the guidance would be because it doesn't reflect reality, and so it gives a false impression.
Yeah, and we know that from Mr. Saunders, the applicant's position formally given in evidence is that it's not a realistic scenario.
So Mr. Saunders conceded that it didn't reflect reality, projecting that far into the future. And it's also in the note. We know that if you were to continue with the linear extrapolation method, you would hit 100% electric vehicles. They make that clear in the note.
Now, final question. You were asked about, well, let's say you're right. This scheme is a net emitter of carbon. You've then got to go on and consider, this is by reference to paragraph 624 of the QCG guidance, so if you can just take that up, please.
Yeah.
It's on page 56 and over to 57.
Yeah.
And it was put to you that there was a strategic fit of schemes. Now, I've taken issue with that, and I don't want to ask you about that. But I want to ask you about what follows next in this guidance. And in particular, the final sentence of this guidance, 624. We see that the net impact of schemes, however, should not be dismissed. It should be a key consideration in determining carbon management and scheme prioritisation. So what do you take from that final sentence of the guidance to which Mr. Henderson?
So that in many cases it will be more proportionate to recognise uncertainty in a qualitative manner. So
no, just the final sentence of 624. So the point is referring to the before that in 620.
Okay, you've directed the witness to the appropriate part, Mr. Parker.
So it's the net impact. Sorry. I just need a moment to just read this
Yes,
paragraph.
just read the paragraph, Professor Hurst.
Yes, so they're saying that some schemes might enable. Wider policies and interventions. So I think this relates to the link to the wider fit here. That and it's saying that the net impact scheme itself should not be dismissed, rather than you may choose to consider it in combination with wider interventions, but you don't have to. You shouldn't dismiss the impact of the scheme itself when prioritising the scheme and also determining the carbon management. So this relates to the point that was made about the strategic fit. That you may have considered that, but in doing so, you shouldn't dismiss the impact of the scheme itself, which is that it's a net emitter.
Thank you, Professor Hurst. Those are all the questions I have for you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Professor Hurst.
Thank you.
It's time at this juncture for the mid-session break. We'll resume, please, at 20 to 12. Thank you. He's here.
He's here. I was going to say while we're waiting, because me too. Can I just report? Apparently, the live stream has been slightly intermittent at points, and
Right.
can I reassure anybody who is watching now or is intending to later
Yes.
that the uninterrupted version, I'm told, will be available on YouTube. So anybody who wishes to
Yes.
see every part of the proceedings will be able to do so.
Thanks, Mr. Cameron. I think that's been the case once or twice before as well. That
Yes.
there's been concern about it appearing to have dropped out, but you can watch it later on
Yes.
and catch up. Yeah, thank you. Right, Mr. Parker, time to introduce, I think, your next witness.
Yes, thank you. And apologies for being late to return.
You're exactly
Good afternoon, Mr. Woodfield. You have given a proof of evidence in relation to this matter, and if I just briefly introduce you by reference to proof of evidence before I ask you some questions.
Is your mic on, Mr.?
I think it is on, yeah. Maybe it's not close enough to me, so I've moved it closer. But section 1.1 of your proof of evidence, you explain that you're Dominic Woodfield, you're a professional ecologist and the managing director of Bioscan. You're a non-executive director of Biofarm, a company specialising in assisting developers, landowners, planning authorities with the practical delivery of statutory BNG. You hold an honours degree in environmental studies with geography from Manchester Metropolitan University. You're a registered chartered ecologist, chartered environmentalist, and a full member of the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. Is all of that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And you give various other examples of the work that you undertake in your proof of evidence. And I'm not going to go through any of that in detail now, but it's there set out in black and white in your proof. And at paragraph 1.8 you set out there the basis of your instructions and the scope of those instructions and the scope of your evidence. And is all of that correct?
That's all correct, yes.
Thank you. Now, I just want to briefly run through the topics covered in your proof of evidence and ask you, in the course of doing so, to pick up on some points made by Mr. Ellis by way of rebuttal to your proof.
Yep.
So starting with section 3, which is where the substance really of your proof begins, you have a heading CPPF scheme baseline, and at paragraphs 3.1.1 through to 3.4.2 you describe the baseline conditions which are relevant to the CPPF scheme. I'm not going to ask you to read any of that or summarise any of that because it'll be taken as read. As far as you're aware, has there been any challenge or objection to the evidence that you give in relation to that?
No, not as far as I'm aware.
Section 4, you deal with habitat losses arising from the CPPF scheme, and at paragraph 4.2.1 you refer to figures which are appended to your proof of evidence, and I'd just like you, please, if we can just turn to those figures just for completeness, if you can just explain the basis for those figures to the inspectors. I know they are working from paper copies, so it may be that we need to refer to the particular figures themselves as well as the PDF. I can give the PDF pages, perhaps.
Yes, I was aware the inspectors were working from paper copies, so I made sure I had a paper copy as well. Hopefully that would assist.
So if we start with DW1, which is on PDF 65. And if you just work through those figures and explain what they
Okay, so what we set out to do was to document the baseline habitat conditions, habitat classifications and conditions within the highways land between Madingley Mulch and the Park and Ride, which is the section that CPPF were concerned with in terms of their alternative. We undertook habitat surveys between May and July of this year. We used a UK HAB method, the standard methodology for classifying the habitats and attributing condition assessments to them for the purposes of inputting to the biodiversity net gain metric. And we wanted to do that because we set out to use the biodiversity net gain metric as a quantitative comparator between the ecological impact of the CPPF alternative and the GCP scheme. So that was why we chose that approach and why we came up with a quantitative baseline figure. So that deals with figures D1, DW1 and DW2. Figures DW3 and DW4 are the same figures with imposed upon them the scheme as ultimately arrived at and as shown in the civilistics drawings attached to Mr. Johnston's proof. And obviously, once you're into the QGIS program, you can calculate the areas of the various habitats that are therefore impacted by the delivery of the scheme. And you come up with a cumulative and numerative figure for impact from the scheme. We deliberately restricted ourselves to just the carriageway at this stage because that was the fairest way of coming up with a direct comparator with the GCP scheme, because the GCP scheme is far more advanced in terms of design of engineering requirements, batter slopes, drainage basins, etc. And we were cognizant from the outset that that was a second stage of a alternative design that we, being effectively not being a proponent for seeking planning permission, but effectively just exploring alternatives. That was not really our role to get into that, but we just wanted to make sure that we were effecting a fair comparison. So DW...
Sorry, Mr. When you said just the carriageway, do you mean just literally...
The extended carriageway. So the carriageway post the...
What are you including in the carriageway? So in terms of the C2C scheme, there's obviously a carriageway to carry...
Carriageway, busway and the shared
and there's
use
an emergency
cycleway.
access.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And again, just so I understand you correctly, but what you're saying is you've considered that, but not the implications of land embankments, cuttings.
Exactly. We had those in mind, and certainly when... So this was an iterative process. And...
It's okay, I just wanted to understand
Yeah.
it based on that, so
Yeah,
thanks for clarifying
sure.
that.
Okay. So that's DW3 and DW4. And DW5 and DW6 effectively show the same thing, but in a slightly easier to read manner, because they focus on what's retained and what's lost. And you can readily appreciate from that you've got existing carriageway, existing hard surface effectively, so no realistic change from a nature conservation perspective. That's shown as retained because there's no change. But then you've got these slivers either side of it of yellow coloured habitat loss, which is where habitat has been encroached upon due to the expansion of the curb-to-curb part of the scheme. So just to reconfirm, that's carriageway, busway and shared use foot cycle path. Also shown on there are the trees that we have accepted would probably not be able to be retained with that scheme. And in coming to the conclusion about tree impacts and tree loss, we were certainly cognizant, or I was certainly cognizant on site, of the need for engineering works, which are yet to be specified. So we took a very realistic approach to determining where there was likely to be encroachment into root protection zones, where trees were currently sited so close to the carriageway that they probably wouldn't be able to be retained. And we took I would actually say, a rather pessimistic view, because as you will know, and I suspect you heard from Mr. Alder, there are mechanisms for allowing tree retention even when the root zone is impacted upon. So as you'll see there on the DW5 and DW6, we've also indicated where trees are, where they've been retained, and where they are assumed as likely to be lost.
Thank you. And in response to the Inspector and what you've just said, you've answered a couple of the questions I was going to ask about the assumptions on which your analysis is based. I just want to ask you one additional point, which came out of a question that Mr. Cameron put to Mr. Johnston about those assumptions and the potential effects. And we can go to the documents if we need to, but perhaps ask you at the principled level. Mr. Johnston's position was that rather than build up the road in certain places, you would cut down. And the point put by Mr. Cameron to Mr. Johnston was that no amount of hand digging can get you around routes that may be exposed if you reduce the level of the tarmac as opposed to build up. Are you able to comment on that, please?
Yes, certainly. I don't think we necessarily need to go to the cross-sections, but I think the cross-sections are quite useful in indicating that in most instances the carriageway has actually was built up over time.
Well, let's if you think it would be useful, let's briefly do
Sure.
it. It's Mr. Lonergan's rebuttal proof. Mr. Lonergan's rebuttal appendices, sorry, which are CD 2601.
We've also got CD 2958 as well, the ones with the vertical red lines.
Yep. Have you got the? Well,
I've got those, but I can go to either.
I think for the purpose of my questions, it doesn't actually matter because the cross sections are labelled in the same way. But if you've got those cross sections in front of you, and why don't you pick one that you think is helpful for the inspectors to look at to make the point that you're making?
Why don't we pick? I believe that DD maybe. No, sorry. CC I think is one that's obviously of particular relevance because it's a cross section close to Madingley Wood. Triple SI.
So just wait for everyone to catch. So if we're working from Mr. Lonergan's rebuttal appendices, it's PDF page 38. You may have a PDF number
CD
for
2958. It's PDF page 5.
2958.
Yeah. 2958 PDF page 5. Cross section CC. So this illustrates the point about the cross-sections, Mr. Lonergan's cross-sections, rather suggesting that there would be a need for significant made ground raising to accommodate the carriageway. And I think I had discussions with Mr. Johnston and Mr. Lee about whether it might actually be more sensitive and more appropriate in that situation to cut rather than fill. And that might then have a knock-on implication for the size of any batter slopes that you would need to accommodate. But that cross-section also shows, at the right-hand side of it, that in most instances the trees that are adjoining Madingley Road are on lower ground. And in a lot of instances, let's see if I can find an example, they are separated from the carriageway by a ditch. So cross-section AA on the previous page shows an existing ditch. And obviously in circumstances such as that, the tree that's shown indicatively there, the root system of that tree will have already had to accommodate and deal with the intervening ditch. So cut on the roadside of that ditch is unlikely to encounter significant root mass. And the same applies to the cross-section I started with, CC, where you've got the tree at a significantly lower elevation. So I don't think it's a given that where you need to cut, you are instantly going to come across roots of nearby trees.
Thank you. Then in terms of the effects themselves, we're back in the main body of your proof, page 21, section 4.3. And in the paragraphs that follow, again, we'll take...
Paper page 17, is that?
Paper page 17, yeah, section 4.3, effect on Madeline Wood, triple SI. Again, take those paragraphs as read. At paragraph 4.3.5, you refer to bats, and we're going to come back to bats. But aside from the issue of bats, has there been any criticism, as far as you understand it, of the assessment that you carry out in terms of Madingley Wood triple SI?
No, not as far as I'm aware. No.
Then in terms of section 4.4, you have a BNG calculation associated with the CPPF scheme. Again, take it as read, but as far as you understand, has there been any criticism or challenge of your BNG calculation?
No.
Then section 5, habitat losses arising from the GCP scheme. This deals with various topics which are the subject of a response from Mr. Ellis in his rebuttal proof. So I just want to give you the opportunity to comment on each of those points. So the first point that you raise at 5.2 relates to impacts of the GCP scheme on Coton Orchard, Country Wildlife Site, and other non-statutory sites. And if you please take up the rebuttal proof of Mr. Ellis. In relation to, I think he's produced separate rebuttals for different parties. So it's CD 2601 13.5 is the reference. Rebuttal in relation to CPPF. You've just
I've got that.
to find that document. So it's 2601. $13.5.
Thank you.
No, not at all. And we can see that Mr. Ellis, on page 3, at section 3.1, his first rebuttal topic under the heading is rebuttal in relation to the BNG calculation of habitat within Coton Orchard. Now, I think the most efficient way is if you could just summarise the issue between you, and if you could provide your response to what Mr. Ellis says in his rebuttal proof in relation to the habitat designation within Coton Orchard.
Sure. So the issue between us is that in the applicant's view and in Mr. Ellis's view, only certain relatively small parts of Coton Orchard qualify as the priority habitat type traditional orchard. And he takes various points in rebuttal. If I could maybe just take them in turn. He takes issue with my statement that the primary determinant for identifying traditional orchard priority habitat is land use, history and management. And he says that the statement that land use and management is the defining feature of traditional orchard is evidently wrong.
Just make sure the inspectors have, so this is paragraph 3.1.3 of his rebuttal, yeah?
Yes, sorry. He then sets out a quote below that. I mean, the first point to make is obviously habitat structure. I mean, he says habitat structure rather than vegetation types, topography or soils is the defining feature of the habitat. I wouldn't disagree, but habitat structure is, of course, a function of management. And we can see why management is so critical to the recognition and definition of traditional orchard in the quote he himself provides below, in how frequently the word managed or management appears in that quote. So, for example, traditional orchards are defined for priority habitat purposes as orchards managed in a low-intensity way, in contrast with orchards managed intensively for fruit production. So we can talk about semantics as to whether habitat structure is a function of management or what have you, but we're effectively talking about the same thing. We then go on at 3.1.5, and this is where the applicant and Mr. Ellis, I would have to say, goes slightly off-piste and effectively contrive to make a new non-existent habitat category, non-existent in the sense that it doesn't appear in the UK HAB system, nor in the BNG system, nor does it appear in the JNCC definition that Mr. Ellis himself agrees is determinative and definitive. This is this category, other orchard habitat. Now, if you go to the JNCC definition of traditional orchard, and actually, sirs, I would suggest that you go and stand in Coton Orchard and you have a copy of this description in hand, which you can find at my appendix DW5 of my main proof.
Right, well, let's just pause there to take that up.
Yeah. So this is the JNCC UK Biodiversity Habitat Action Plan Priority Habitat Description. So this defines the habitat that is now classified as a habitat of principal importance under the NERC Act. So is a habitat with elevated status and elevated scoring in the BNG system. So capable of being a material consideration in the determination of development proposals. So this is how you define it by reference to the JNCC. And if you take the first page, we can go down and we can say, if we go about halfway down the first paragraph, talks about traditional orchards include plantings for nuts, principally hazelnuts, but also walnuts. I'm not sure that applies in this case. But management of the trees is the other main feature distinguishing traditional orchards and wood pasture and parkland. So there's that word management again. Grazing or cutting of herbaceous vegetation are integral to orchard management. So we're talking about a cut grassland understory in relation and field layer in relation to Coton Orchard. The presence of scrub, mostly in the form of hedgerows on the site boundaries or sometimes, especially in unmanaged orchards, among the orchard trees, is analogous to the frequent occurrence of scrub in wood pastures and parkland and plays a similar ecological role. Ponds and other wetland features. There's a wet ditch at the eastern edge of Coton Orchard. Variety of fruit cultivars we can see in the next paragraph. In the bottom paragraph on that page, Traditional orchards are defined for priority habitat purposes as orchards managed, there's that word again, in a low intensity way, in contrast with orchards managed intensively for fruit production by the input of chemicals such as pesticides and inorganic fertilizers. So there we can see that there's no third category. This is a dichotomous decision to be made on, you either have an orchard that is managed in a low intensive traditional way, which is traditional orchard, or you have an orchard that's managed in an intensive way with chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers and ploughing up of strips, and that is an intensive orchard. The JNCC habitat description does not talk about a third other orchard category. So if we go over the page...
Sorry to interrupt you there, Mr. Woodfield. So, is there a biodiversity, a description of an intensively managed orchard, or does that fall into a wider habitat area in contrast?
Yes, so intensive orchards are described in this same description. So they're described as a kind of default as to what doesn't qualify. So anything that doesn't qualify as a
sorry, is there a you've got an extract here from the JNCC. Is there another JNCC entry for...
No, because it's not a priority habitat type. So intensive orchards are low value.
So you're saying that there's, I understand.
They fall out of account because they're not of sufficient value to be classed as a habitat of principal importance. So they're defined by exclusion here in this description. So you can understand what constitutes an intensive orchard here. And I give an example of it in my appendix DW6 in terms of a photograph, which it might be useful to have a quick look at now. So in appendix DW6, page 3 of that appendix. Sorry, I don't have a PDF.
118 to the PDF.
So on that page are 2 photos. The bottom one is of Coton Orchard, and the top one is of a typical intensive orchard. So you can see densely spaced, dwarf variety trees in intensive rows stretching off into the horizon there, herbicided strips underneath them, vigorously pruned in order to keep everything manageable and low, and improved grassland in between the two, which is probably maintained by fertilizer as well. So there's quite a stark contrast between the above image and the below image. And going back to Mr. Ellis's rebuttal, where he says at 3.1.5, Mr. Woodfield appears to be of the opinion that any orchard that is not managed intensively must be traditional orchard, but this is demonstrably incorrect. He doesn't choose to demonstrate why it's incorrect, and by reference to the traditional orchard description, it only gives a dichotomous option. It's either traditional orchard or it's intensive orchard. There is no third category. That seems to have been conjured up by WSP and supported by Mr. Ellis as a way of effectively giving Coton Orchard a lower value and a lower score than any reasonable reading of this priority habitat description would give it. So I don't agree that I've misconstrued the criteria. I think the whole of Coton Orchard, with some exceptions which I refer to in my evidence, so areas where the fruit trees have gone, clearly they're not either intensive or traditional orchard anymore. Areas where the fruit trees have been grubbed out and scrub has developed, they're clearly not orchard anymore. There's a question mark over areas where neglect and lapse of management has allowed scrub to subsume the orchard trees, but they're all still there. We can have a conversation about that, but for most of the site, it is pretty clear that it falls squarely within the priority habitat definition. And that has a significant implication, because what WSP have chosen to do when it comes to scoring this habitat in terms of their biodiversity net gain inputs is they found that when you go to the biodiversity net gain metric, there is no other orchard category. So what they've done is they've said, well, we'll call it grassland instead, despite the presence of orchard trees. So that's one level of error. The second level of error, and the one that has a much more profound impact on the biodiversity net gain score, is to completely disregard the trees, which makes no sense from any kind of logical perspective, but has a very, very profound effect on the biodiversity net gain score that WSP have attributed to the GCP scheme. So, would you like me to just...
Well, let's come back.
Yeah.
I think you deal with that in a separate section of your proof, so let's deal with specifically with your concerns about BNG. So that's... I'll ask you one question about what you've just said, that WSP have chosen to classify or exercise the judgment to classify this as grassland rather than orchard. And if you can turn in paragraph 3.1.11 of Mr. Ellis's rebuttal, which is page 5, there's a photograph, an image which you also have in your proof of evidence of the order limits, satellite image of the order limits, and Mr. Ellis says areas of open grassland do not meet the definition of traditional orchard, and essentially says this isn't orchard, this is grassland. Can I just ask you to comment on that in a little bit more detail, please?
Yes, so the region, this is my image taken from my appendix DW6, of course. The reason that we put that image in there is to effectively expose the fallacy, if you like, of selective picking up of bits of the orchard and accepting that those are traditional orchard and disregarding the rest, even though it has more or less the same characteristics. Same habitat management, it's all part of the same management unit. And there's a fixation on age of trees here, and whether they've been planted on vigorous or non-vigorous rootstocks. If you go through the JNCC habitat description, that is the only point of ambiguity. There is a whole suite, a whole avalanche of plus points in favour of taking the route towards definition of traditional orchard, and effectively just one point of ambiguity to suggest that there's parts of that orchard that don't sit fully within that habitat description. And what WSP have chosen to do is to latch onto that minor deviation and use it to downgrade the habitat classification to the rest of the orchard. So just looking at that image, you can see that there is, for example, I think Mr. Ellis provides a justification as to why the right-hand red box has been accepted to be traditional orchard, because he says effectively it's the size of the trees. But you can see readily from that image that to the land to the right of that red box has trees of very similar age and size, as does land towards the left-hand end of that image, where there are trees, again, with a rootstock and a stem height of much higher than 75 centimetres. These are large trees. These are decent-sized trees. So even if Mr. Ellis and WSP were correct to say that anything on a small rootstock should be disregarded and cannot be classed as traditional orchard, even if it's managed traditionally, there would still be a shortfall in areas that have been properly recognised as orchards. So it's a very confused and ambiguous picture, and it it really just smacks of a situation where every effort has been made to try and downgrade the value of this habitat. And I think it chimes with the position that WSP have taken on the veteran trees, which is to deny that they're veteran in the first instance and then gradually come round to the idea that they might be. And Mr. Alder fully now accepts that, as I saw. So yes, I think the safest assumption, the precautionary and conservative assumption, is to assume that Coton Orchard is traditional orchard, except in the places where it very clearly isn't. So the very central strip you can see in that image, where there are no trees at all, can happily be excluded from traditional orchard. But pretty much everything else you can see in there, other than perhaps a couple of pockets of open grassland, should be and the hedgerows should be classified as traditional orchard.
Thank you. Next topic then, in your proof as responded to by Mr. Ellis, relates to 3 non-statutory designated sites that you refer to. And this is
PDF page 7, is it?
Yeah, paragraph 5.2.7 of your proof.
Oh, yeah.
And section 3.2 on page 7 of Mr. Ellis's rebuttal. Same exercise. Can you just summarise, inspectors, what is, as it were, the issue between you, and then give your view by way of response to what Mr. Ellis has said?
Okay, so the CPPF scheme doesn't impact on any non-statutory sites, and the GCP scheme impacts on 4. Let's just make that clear at the outset. I have issues with the way the impact on the 4. I agree actually with the assessment, the overall assessment of the impact on Coton Orchard County Wildlife Site as of county importance, an adverse impact that's significant at county level. I do agree with that. But in respect of the other 3 non-statutory sites, they are effectively disregarded as having as being subject to no significant impact. And that is despite them all, to a greater or lesser extent, being at risk of substantial land take from them for development. And that's the point I make in my ES, is that in my proof of evidence, is that you wouldn't regard a 5% or a 17% loss of a triple SI as non-significant. So why does it suddenly become non-significant in relation to a non-statutory site? And this all ultimately seems to hinge around a word that's actually missing from most of Mr. Ellis's evidence and from the environmental statement, is the distinction between potential impacts and residual impacts after mitigation and compensation. There does seem to be a tendency to confound the two in the environmental statement for the scheme, and to talk about impacts, for example, on these non-statutory sites as not significant, which can convey the view that that means that they're not going to be subject to any risk of significant impact, when in fact they are going to be subject to significant impacts. It's just that the applicant has satisfied itself that with mitigation, and actually more accurately with compensation, it can arrive at a position of saying that the overall residual impact is not significant. So I think there's an EIA methodological and terminological problem there, syntax problem. I would go a little bit further in respect of the Coton Path hedgerow county wildlife site. Now that's subject to a loss of a little under 5% of its extent. And the way, or the evidence upon which the environmental statement seems to reach a conclusion that that does not constitute a significant effect, is because they did not find any rare or scarce species there. Now, Coton Path Hedgerow County Wildlife Site is designated for the basis, amongst other things, for the presence of 2 nationally scarce species. And I don't know if anybody else has managed to, but I've certainly not found anywhere in any of the evidence or any of the documents before this inquiry, in the environmental statement, anywhere else, where those species are named, where it is said that they have been actively looked for in assessing the impacts on that county wildlife site, whether they're present, whether they're absent, are they present in the affected section? If they are they going to be mitigation or compensation measures to deal with the impact upon them? None of that is anywhere in the environmental statement. Those 2 species, which are effectively the fundamental reason why that site is designated, are left completely out of account. So again, I challenge the basis upon which the applicant has arrived at a no significant effect conclusion in relation to Coton Path Hedgerow. So that's the non-statutory sites.
Thank you. Then the final topic, which I think may relate to what you've just said, relates to the...
Sorry, Mr.
Sorry.
Mr. Woodford, he said that's the...
Non-statutory sites.
Yes, but there are 2 that you haven't told us about, aren't there?
Yes, so the other 2, Binbrook and Scrub east of M11, they're both city wildlife sites.
Yes, that's right.
The impact on them is really down to quantitative loss, and I challenge the conclusions on the basis of if you are removing a chunk of a designation, unless you are setting out very clear and prescriptive compensation proposals as to how that loss will be compensated at that location and allow that designation to be redrawn so that it doesn't suffer any overall loss of extent and maintains its integrity and the reasons for which it was designated, I don't see how you can come to a no likely significant effect or no significant effect conclusion. There's vague references to compensation in the environmental statement and in Mr. Ellis's evidence. But that could mean delivering compensation miles away as part of an off-site biodiversity net gain scheme. That would leave those sites subject to significant residual impact.
Thank you. And then finally, at 5.2.10, you refer to your concerns about the adequacy of the habitat and botanical survey information underpinning the ES more generally, to which Mr. Ellis has responded at paragraph 3.3 on page 7 of his proof. And again, same exercise, just identify the issue and then set out your position.
Yeah, I mean, I can go a bit quicker through this one, I suspect. Mr. Ellis said, I mean, at the time I wrote my proof, the 2 examples I gave were the ones that immediately sprung to mind, but obviously we've now got an additional omission in relation to the 2 nationally scarce species that I've just spoken about. So I don't think it can be disregarded as trivial. And just to come back on a couple of rebuttal points. So I don't think they are. I don't think the omission of naming and assessing the nationally scarce species at Coton Path Hedgerow can be regarded as trivial and inconsequential. At 3.3.4, Mr. Ellis's rebuttal says the identification of microspecies of elm requires specialist skills relevant to this group. It doesn't. It just requires that you work through the key that is given as a footnote in my evidence, Brian Eversham's key. It also requires that you just recognise that the Cambridge locality is a well-known taxonomical hotspot for different varieties, including endemic varieties, of elm. Now, Mr. Ellis may say that's not relevant to EIA. I say it is. I say it is to a thorough EIA. He tries to make good on that point by saying these varieties of elm are predominantly not listed on the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland Atlas. Well, A, that's not a definitive conclusion as to whether they're of value or not, but in any event, if one goes to the BSBI Atlas and looks at the Ulmus minor aggregate, there's a long description adjacent to it where it effectively says, it talks about it being an aggregate group of species and microspecies, and the only reason it has not mapped them separately, it is just too difficult to do that because their distributions are blurred and there are some challenges to identification. So, for example, it says Ulmus procera remains the most widespread species within the aggregate. So it's not, BSBI is not saying these microspecies and these varieties don't matter. It's saying, just simply saying, we can't actually accurately map them at national scale.
Thank you. I want to move on then. Section 4 of your proof of evidence deals with an assessment of the CPPF alternative scheme. Sorry, no, that's an error in my note. So then moving on to section 6, sorry, we've done section 4, we've done section 5. Section 6, next number. This deals with the specific topic in relation to bats, and we have, of course, already heard from Paula Reason on behalf of the applicant in respect of bats. Now, I just want to pick up where we left off with Paula Reason, Ms. Reason, and for you to give your view in relation to some of the topics that we discussed. I mean, her position, and Mr. Cameron or Mr. Henderson, as the case may be, can jump in and tell me if I'm summarising the position wrongly, but Ms. Reason's position on behalf of the applicant was that the order scheme had potential effects on bats, but that those potential effects could be mitigated such that the scheme was acceptable. In terms of the CPPF alternative, while she had expressed a position in her written evidence that there were potential impacts, she accepted, following questions from me, that there weren't likely to be any significant impact, and that the CPPF scheme was sequentially preferable by reference to the mitigation hierarchy. But again, she reiterated that in her view it didn't really matter ultimately because neither scheme was harmful. So I just want to ask you about some of that. In your proof of evidence, you carry out an assessment of the CPPF scheme by reference to potential effects on bats. Can you just briefly give your view as to whether there are any likely significant effects as a result of the CPPF alternative scheme?
So the CPPF alternative scheme, and you'd have read this in my evidence, so I'll rattle through. CPPF alternative scheme is hugely preferable in terms of risk to bats because it effectively involves minor upgrades of an existing busy A road. So with that A road corridor, and Ms. Reason makes this point herself in evidence in relation to the online elements of the GCP scheme, that existing A road is effectively a kind of corridor of impacts and potential impacts on bats, within which that zone of influence, if you like, that envelope of influence, impacts from traffic, collision risk mortality, lighting, noise, spray, everything else, backdraft. Within that envelope, a minor upgrade of carriageway width to accommodate a busway and a shared foot cycleway is pretty close to neither here nor there. It is a very different situation when you drive a new corridor of such impacts through open countryside, through numerous hedgerows, through high-value habitats such as coat and orchard, through scrub, through woodland, across watercourses. Cumulatively, you are ramping up the risk to bat species in the local landscape by doing that. The other factor, of course, with the existing envelope around the A1303 Madingley Road is that, and I think Ms. Reason's thermal imaging report demonstrates this as well, the report that she submitted that's now an inquiry document, that bats are habituated to the issues, if you like, if you want to call them that, along the Madingley Road, whereas a brand new corridor of impact across open countryside, not to put too fine a point on it, is going to come as a big surprise. And so, to the extent that that will sever commuting corridors, reduce foraging area, degrade foraging area, and introduce a whole load of new hazards, it's very clear that there is a gulf of difference in impact risk between the CPPF scheme and the GCP scheme. And in relation to the one issue that Ms. Reason did concern herself with in relation to our scheme, which was crossing points adjoining Madingley Wood, under cross-examination, I think we got her to recognise that that is an area of diffuse crossing by bats, with lots of areas where the gap is quite narrow, 5 metres or so, and that the loss of the 3 ash trees that she was concerned about is effectively immaterial to whether those crossing points will still be there.
Thank you. Now, one particular topic I want to ask your view on mitigation. The GCP scheme relies on mitigation for bats, particularly bat hopovers. You recall I asked Ms. Reason a series of questions on this. She accepted that there was a degree of uncertainty about the mitigation that was proposed. Can you just give your view, please, on that topic?
Yes, I was a bit concerned that there was a sort of a slight slide into false certainty around the issue by Ms. Reason. And no mitigation is 100% successful necessarily. And in this case, we don't even have empirical evidence of barbastelle successfully using hopovers. We tried to go to the link and we weren't able to in Ms. Reason's cross-examination, but that document's now in the inquiry, and it effectively validates the point that there is no documented use of hopovers by barbastelles. There is an assumption based on their behavioural characteristics and their flight characteristics that they should work, but that's not quite the same as they do work.
So just briefly, you referred to a document. What's the...
Sorry, it's in the additional inquiry documents. It's the roads review. Where is it? Here goes, CD 2933. Guidelines for bat mitigation on roads. And actually, I think we should go to that document because there are elements in that document that Ms. Reason didn't choose to elaborate upon, which I think are relevant here.
So just so we're all clear, this is a document which Ms. Reason referred to. What significance did she attach to it, in your understanding, or what is the relevance of this document?
So this is a conference of European roads directors, and it was discussing various forms of mitigation for where roads impact on bat crossing points and bat transit through the landscape, and it's reviewing various methodologies, tunnels, green bridges, and hopovers. And it's hopovers that Ms. Reason and WSP have decided are proportionate in this case. Just a quick point on that would be that actually one reason I suspect that hopovers have been selected is that they're the only thing that will retrospectively fit into the order limits. And in fact, that point I think is made in one of the technical notes appended to Ms. Reason's evidence. I can take there if needed. That there's only space to put hopovers in, embanked hopovers in a couple of locations. So again, it's an illustration that the mitigation hierarchy hasn't perhaps been applied with the rigour that might be expected. But in any event, this is Ms. Reason's reliance on this document was to effectively say, well, here is an evidence review that suggests hopovers should work for Barbastells. Not that they do work, but that they should work. And I think it's relevant to go to page 19 of that document because there are elements that she didn't choose to say or expand upon. So that's PDF page 23, paper page 19 of that document, top of the page. You there, sir? So hopovers may have some potential for reducing bat-vehicle collision risk for some species. Names Dorbenton's bat, Brandt's whiskered bat, and greater mouse-eared bat there. Under certain circumstances, but hopovers have not been documented to consistently increase the flight height sufficiently for bats attempting to cross the roads. Fence and screen hopovers are ineffective for horseshoe bats, which are not relevant in this case, which tend to fly along the fence to cross the roads at a low height at the end of the barrier. Hopovers are also potentially, and this is important, hopovers are probably also ineffective for other low-flying maneuverable species, including their Myotis naturae, which is Natura's bat, which is a species that has been recorded and is present within the landscape that the scheme runs through, and Placotis species, which are the long-eared bats, including brown long-eared bat, which is also a species that's present in the landscape. So whilst there is a supposition that hopovers might work for Barbastell, unproven, but it's a good stab, that leaves out of account species that it simply won't work for. They might not be as rare as Barbastell, but they're still protected. And brown long-eared is a priority species under the NERC Act. It then goes on to talk about screen
Mr. Woodfield,
hopovers.
are you saying that Barbastrel are the only ones that could use the hopover?
Well, I think the hopovers have been designed with Barbastell in mind.
Yes.
But that leaves out of account a whole range of other bat species. And obviously Barbastell is an important consideration here because that's where Natural England's concerns were mainly focused. But I think it's relevant to note that even if the mitigation works for Barbastell, it might not work for other bat species. And this
So it might
evidence,
not, you're not saying it won't?
not saying it won't.
Yeah.
I don't have evidence that hopovers don't work. But what we have here,
You're
according
saying
to...
you simply don't know one way or the other?
It's just uncertain. And this is my point about false certainty.
Okay, thank
And
you.
it's about risk. And that's effectively fundamentally the point about the mitigation hierarchy and about why I think the CPPF scheme is preferable. These risks simply don't arise with the CPPF scheme, whereas they do arise with the GCP scheme. They require mitigation to try and make them acceptable in EIA terms. They require mitigation to make them acceptable to Natural England and in habitats regulations terms. And we don't know whether that mitigation will be successful. The other thing that Ms. Reason did leave out of account, which I also think is relevant here, is the focus of Barbastell records in the West Cambridge University Sports Campus area. Now, there's a strange run of data from 2019 through to the present, whereby earlier studies by Cambridge Ecology, I can take you to them if needed, they're in their inquiry documents, and latterly by Thompson, all found hotspots of Barbastell activity in that area, suggestive of the presence of a roost in that area. The WSP surveys that followed on didn't find significant Barbastell activity in that area, and I think the supposition has then been taken, oh, well, we don't need to worry about it anymore then. I don't think that's a safe assumption. I don't think either WSP or Ms. Reason should be making that assumption. And having gone and had a look at that area, the area where there's been a focus of Barbastell records in the past adjoins an area of woodland. And the scheme will go very close to that area, and there is no elevated hop over, as far as I'm aware, designed for that area, just planting to try and get the tree height sufficient to create a hop over. So again, these are risks that simply don't arise with the GCP scheme, and risks that I think are rather left out of account in WSP's EIA and in Ms. Reason's evidence.
Thank you. Moving on then from that, if I can ask you please to take up Mr. Ellis's main proof of evidence, which is CD 2601-13-1.
Yeah.
And turn within it to PDF page 16. And we're here within section 5, which is dealing with potential impacts and effects, although the paragraph numbering in my version seems to all be paragraph 1.1 something. But
yes, yeah, mine too. Yeah.
So at paragraph 1.1.97 and following, we have referenced various headings: aquatic ecology, badgers, water vole, reptiles, amphibians, terrestrial invertebrates, birds, going down the list. I just want to deal with those all collectively. Those are all, we can see, areas in which potential effects are identified.
Yes.
And mitigation proposed. Do those potential effects and the need for mitigation arise with any of those fauna in relation to the CPPF scheme?
In nearly all cases, no. So aquatic ecology, no. Badgers, no. Water voles, certainly not. Reptiles, outside chance of the odd animal present in the Madingley Road verges, but relatively easy dealt with. Great crested newts, we're not affecting any ponds. Terrestrial invertebrates, well, there's a huge difference between the Madingley Road corridor and Coton Orchard. Incidentally, I noticed that the Coton Orchard invertebrate surveyors said most of the site is traditional orchard as well. Birds, the same. I've got a paper in my evidence that shows the impact of roads on birds, so that's a suppressed issue that won't be exacerbated by the TPPF scheme. So yeah, in all instances, the issues simply don't arise with the CPPF scheme or are substantially less risk.
Thank you. Then moving section 8 of your proof of evidence. I think in section 7 you do some analysis of GCP's assessment. We don't need to go there in view of the fact there's been no challenge to your evidence. Section 8 then, mitigation hierarchy, and it's relevant to the question of policy compliance. You have a series of paragraphs. Again, all this will be taken as read, but if you can just summarise your position, please, if you compare the two schemes, the CPPF alternative and the GCP scheme, by reference to the mitigation hierarchy, please, and briefly.
Yes, so the mitigation hierarchy would compel one, once reaching a conclusion that there is a potential significant effect and a county significant adverse effect from the GCP scheme, the mitigation hierarchy would compel you to revisit the question of whether there are alternatives. And our case is that we've presented a workable alternative. And the full application of the mitigation hierarchy would suggest that that alternative should be preferred on ecological grounds. If all other things are equal, then there's simply no contest.
Thank you. Final topic then, BNG. I want to turn to the applicant's BNG assessment associated with its own scheme. Mm-hmm. You have made a number of I think it's fair to say, trenchant criticisms of the assessment, and you have produced a separate report which appears at DW6 of your proof of evidence.
That's correct.
Which is page 116 of the PDF. If you can just, again, as briefly as you can, summarise the issues that you have identified with the GCP assessment.
Okay, so I don't think we need to go back over Coat and Orchard again, other than to just re-clarify that I think it's been misclassified and underscored, downgraded in the B&G calculation. If we go to page 4 of that appendix, I don't know what the PDF page is. The page after the photos.
Yeah.
It's number 2 there, tree loss. Now, Mr. Ellis quite fairly accepts that it is an omission from the applicant's draft B&G calculation not to have counted tree loss, and I've set out why the methodology requires you to have counted tree loss in Coat and Orchard and within the hedgerows. And so with that accepted, I think Mr. Ellis kind of tries to move on quickly in his rebuttal, but actually I think it's important that we understand just what that means in terms of magnitude.
So let's just take it. So if you referred to Mr. Ellis's rebuttal 3.4.3 of his rebuttal evidence, you said Mr. Ellis has accepted the error. Let's just see what he says.
Yes, yeah, 3.4.3. Mr. Ellis says, this is page 8, paper, page 9 PDF of his rebuttal. Mr. Ellis says, it is recognised that individual trees will need to be included in the final B&G calculation.
Okay, so then you were making a point about the consequence of that.
Yes, well, there's 2 points to make early. The first one is, I fail to understand why it was excluded, other than simple oversight, because it would have taken all of 10, 15 seconds to add in a row, quantifying that, particularly given that they've quantified the tree loss within Coat and Orchard, as is mentioned in the ES. But the larger point, the bigger point really here is, what does that do to their B&G calculation? Now, I managed to obtain a copy of their draft B&G calculation. It wasn't submitted with the application, which best practice would require it should have been. We don't need to necessarily get into a debate about whether mandatory B&G applies to this scheme or not, but if it did apply to this scheme, it would be a requirement that the baseline B&G score were submitted with the application. So, at best, a failure of best practice, at worst, a failure of statutory compliance. Anyway, I managed to obtain it from GCP, and I've included it in full Appendix DW4. I needed to be fair, we needed to do an extrapolation exercise to work out from that calculation, which is for the overall scheme, the whole scheme. We needed to extrapolate which bits were relevant to the bit from St Neots Road east of Hardwick to Grange Road, because that's the bit that we're concerned with, because that's what the CPPF alternative is concerned with. The result of that extrapolation exercise is my Appendix DW7, and we can see, if we go to that on the headline results page, the first page of Appendix DW7, that the performance of that part of the GCP scheme is that it will result in a net loss. This is including mitigation and compensation, but not off-site compensation at this stage, because they haven't particularised that. So the scheme as it stands, that section of it, results in a minus 13.33% loss. So a net loss of biodiversity. Measured in units, it's minus 20 habitat units. There's a loss of hedgerows as well, but we didn't go as far as to doing a comparative exercise with those, which is why you've got some zeros there, but you can see them at the top. So bear in mind that total net unit change figure under final results, about just over halfway down the page, minus 20.06 habitat units is the result of the GCP scheme as per the draft B&G calculation. If you go now to Appendix DW8 in the equivalent first page, again showing headline results, if you add in tree loss, which Mr. Ellis accepts should be included, and I say should have been included, that figure more than doubles to minus 48.34 habitat units. Now, Mr. Ellis and WSP may think that this is trivial and it can all be sorted out later because it's a draft scheme, but this has genuine implications for assessing this scheme. Because if that deficit needs to be found off-site, that's quite a lot of habitat units. And as a B&G practitioner working within the commercial sector now on delivery of off-site biodiversity net gain, you're talking at least £25,000 per unit if you had to go to the commercial sector. Now, that's quite a significant additional sum to add on to the cost of the scheme. And it's not all of the corrections that need to be made. So if you correct for the orchard, my Appendix DW9 shows that the figure gets worse, that unit log figure gets worse, and there are other things that still need to be corrected for. So the conclusion really is that the draft B&G calculation and the figures that are actually quoted in the environmental statement and in the biodiversity net gain report are a long way from reliable and a long way from representative of the true impact of the GCP scheme. Now, WSP and Mr. Ellis say, well, that's all fine. B&G allows us to compensate for all of that off-site, and we'll deal with all of that later. But the only site that's been mentioned by the applicant is a site that's 13 to 14 kilometres away on the other side of Cambridge. So what that actually means is that you would have a net loss of habitat, net loss of biodiversity in the Coton and Madingley area, compensated elsewhere on the other side of Cambridge. Now, you may say that that's all within the parameters of what B&G allows for, but it doesn't just have implications for habitat loss. Ms. Reason set an awful lot of stall on the B&G delivery to compensate for losses of foraging habitat for barbastelle bats. And in her evidence, she says rightly that the core sustenance zone for barbastelle bats from Madingley Wood is around about 6 kilometres. So the loss of habitats would be compensated, if it's compensated at the only site that's been mentioned, Lower Valley Farm, would be compensated outside the range of the core sustenance zone of the barbastelle bats, which would mean that they would suffer a net deficit. That has not been considered by Ms. Reason, and as far as I'm aware, that's not been considered in the environmental statement, nor has it been considered, as far as I'm aware, by Natural England, and nor has it been brought to their attention.
Two final questions on compensation. Reference is made to the need for river condition surveys in 3.4.3 of Mr. Ellis's rebuttal proof.
Yes.
Why is that potentially relevant to compensation?
Because again, river watercourse units are dealt with differently under the B&G system, and you have to effectively deliver like for like. So if you're losing watercourse units, which you will be here at Binbrook, and potentially in other locations, they'll need to be compensated as watercourse units somewhere else. Now, as far as I'm aware, Lower Valley Farm is not offering, nor can it necessarily offer, watercourse units, which means that if Lower Valley Farm is where the applicant intends to dump all of its biodiversity compensation, it won't be able to deliver watercourse units at that site. So that will require somewhere else, and they are expensive.
Then finally, 3.4.4 of Mr. Ellis's rebuttal, he records your view, this is the third sentence, that the post-development habitat condition is optimistic, predicated on the view that other natural grassland in good condition may be difficult to achieve adjacent to a busway. And then he then says that grassland in good condition adjacent to a busway has been ambitious with the targeted habitat type and condition. What's your view on the approach taken by the applicant?
There's absolutely nothing wrong with being ambitious, but there's a difference between aiming high, which is laudable, and being realistic when it comes to assessment. So by all means aim high with your habitat compensation and your habitat creation proposals, but when it comes to assessing them in the context of overall impact and EIA, set the dials to realistic. And I don't think it's realistic, and it's manifestly not realistic, because if you look at the baseline inputs for the applicant's B&G calculation, they don't find other neutral grassland of good condition along any of the existing roads. So given that those habitats have been in place now for decades, why do they think they're suddenly going to materialise alongside the busway without very, very significant inputs and management that is simply not particularised or committed to?
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. Those are all the questions I have for you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. That brings us nicely to a point where it's convenient to break for lunch, so we'll do that. The inquiry is adjourned and we'll resume at 2 o'clock, please.